Working at Subway was supposed to be just a simple, easy job to get me through college. It was late 2017 when I got hired for the night shift at a Subway in a small town outside of the city. The store sat at the end of a lonely strip mall, right next to a 24-hour gas station and a rundown laundromat. Most nights, there weren't many customers after 10 p.m., which made the late shift boring but manageable. I could handle boredom, but the things that started happening during those quiet nights made me rethink the entire experience. The first few weeks were normal. I'd get to work around 6 p.m., change into my uniform, and start prepping the store. The day crew always left the place spotless, so my job was mostly making sandwiches, cleaning tables, restocking, and handling any customers who came in. It was an easy gig, and I didn't expect anything weird. Then the little odd things started creeping in. One night, about 3 weeks after I started, I was alone in the store after 11 p.m. The last customer had just left, and I was wiping down the tables when I heard a soft knocking sound coming from the back storage room. The storage was where we kept the bread and other supplies, and the door was usually locked at night. I shrugged it off as someone bumping into the wall from the laundromat next door, but the knocking continued, slow and deliberate. Curious, I grabbed my phone and flicked on the flashlight. I went to the door and tried the handle. It was locked tight, but then the knocking stopped. I stood there for a few minutes, but no more sounds came. Just as I was turning away, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I could have sworn it was locked moments ago. I pushed it open slowly, shining the light inside. The room was empty, boxes stacked neatly on the shelves, and the air smelled musty but normal. Nothing seemed out of place. I closed the door and locked it again. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the hum of the air conditioner felt colder than usual. Over the next few nights, the noises escalated. The knocking became pounding, like someone banging on the walls. At times, I heard faint whispers, but I couldn't make out any words. The worst part was the cold spots that seemed to follow me, especially near the storage room and the small office upstairs. Yes, the Subway had a cramped office above the kitchen, where the district manager sometimes worked. I was told to never go up there alone, but sometimes supplies or paperwork required me to fetch things. One night, the flickering lights suddenly went out for a few seconds, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency exit sign cast a faint red glow, just enough for me to see the silhouette of a man standing in the corner of the dining area. I blinked, and he was gone. My heart hammered in my chest. That same night, when I tried calling my manager to tell her what was happening, the line was dead. The next day, I asked the day crew if anyone else had noticed weird things. One older employee told me the store used to be a different restaurant before Subway moved in, and there had been an incident years ago involving a former employee who disappeared mysteriously. No one ever found him. I tried not to think about it, but things got worse. On one occasion, a man in his 40s came in just before closing. He was wearing a black hoodie, his face partially hidden by shadows. He ordered a sandwich, but when I started to prepare it, he suddenly stopped me. "Make it plain. Just the bread," he said quietly. "No meat. No veggies." It felt eerie, like he wasn't really hungry, but needed something else. He sat in the corner booth near the back exit, barely touching his sandwich. I watched him from behind the counter, and I noticed his eyes darting nervously around the room, almost like he was afraid of something, or someone. When closing time arrived, I told him we were closing up. He didn't respond, just grabbed his sandwich and disappeared out the back door. I went to check, but the back door was locked tight, and no one was around. I never saw that man again. Weeks later, more employees quit the night shift. Some said they felt unsafe. Others mentioned strange voices and sightings. The manager tried to keep things quiet, but the corporate office eventually sent a team to inspect the location. They didn't find anything. But I knew there was something wrong. One night, I was closing alone when I heard footsteps upstairs. I knew no one else was supposed to be there. I grabbed a broom and slowly climbed the creaky stairs. The office door was slightly open, and inside I saw papers scattered all over the floor, despite me being sure it was locked earlier. A cold breeze brushed past me, and I heard a whisper, "Help me." I bolted down the stairs and out the door. That was the last straw. I quit the very next day. The subway closed a month later, and the building has been empty since. Sometimes I drive by and see the flickering lights inside the dark storefront, and sometimes I wonder if the man in the black hoodie is still sitting in that corner booth waiting for someone to listen. Story the end. I started working at Subway when I was 21. It wasn't my first job, but it was my first time on night shifts. I was taking a gap year from college, helping my mom with bills and saving up. The store was in a quiet strip mall near a highway, about 10 minutes from where I lived. Nothing special about it. Typical bright lighting, the green and yellow color scheme, the smell of freshly baked bread clinging to your clothes long after you left. The manager, Tony, was an older guy in his 50s with a perpetual frown. He rarely spoke unless something was wrong. My first couple of weeks were uneventful. I got the hang of prepping ingredients, working the toaster oven, closing procedures, and the awkward banter with customers. The shifts from 4 p.m. to midnight were lonely, but manageable. That changed when Tony asked me to start locking up by myself. "You're good at it," he said, tapping his clipboard without looking at me. "I trust you." I didn't mind. I liked being alone. I'd plug in my headphones during downtime, clean surfaces, and catch up on random thoughts. It gave me peace. But something about that store at night was off. The first time I noticed it, I was sweeping near the soda fountain. It was around 11:30 p.m. and the store was dead. The strip mall's other stores were closed, the parking lot nearly empty. I glanced up and saw someone standing just outside the glass door. No sound, no movement, just standing there. I froze, broom halfway across the floor. It was a man, tall and thin, with a hood pulled tight around his face. The thing that creeped me out was that he wasn't looking inside. His head was turned slightly to the side, like he was listening for something. I watched for several seconds before he slowly walked off to the left, out of frame. I waited a moment longer and stepped out from behind the counter to lock the door, which I usually did at midnight. I didn't see him again that night. I chalked it up to some homeless guy or a late-night wanderer and didn't think much more of it. But the next week, I saw him again. Same time, roughly 11:30 p.m. Same spot, right outside the glass. This time he was looking in, directly at me. His face wasn't visible in detail, just shadowed and pale under the hood. I felt something cold in my chest, like a pressure I couldn't name. I stepped back slowly and reached for my phone, ready to call someone, anyone. But by the time I looked up again, he was gone. I didn't say anything to Tony. Who would believe me? It's not a crime to stand outside a restaurant. A few nights later, I was cleaning the prep table when I heard the distinct sound of the door chime, the ding it makes when someone walks in. But I had already locked the doors 20 minutes earlier. I spun around, heart racing, expecting to see someone. The door was shut. No one was inside. The air felt still, heavy. I walked to the door, checked the lock, definitely secure. Maybe I imagined it, I thought. Maybe the sound played randomly due to a glitch. But then it happened again 2 nights later. That time, the chime rang twice. Once, pause. Then again, like 2 people had walked in. Again, no one was there. This time, I didn't try to rationalize it. I checked the security footage from my phone using the app Tony had us install. I scrubbed back to the exact moment of the chime. The footage showed nothing, no one entering. The door never opened, but I could clearly hear the chime in the background audio. It made no sense. I started closing up faster after that. I avoided looking out the windows and kept the lights on until I was ready to lock up and leave. I stopped listening to music while cleaning. I needed to hear everything. I started jumping at every little sound. Then came the night I almost quit. It was a Thursday, pouring rain, thunder cracking now and then. Business had been dead for hours. Around 11:10 p.m., I was refilling the lettuce container when I heard a knock on the glass door. Just one, sharp and deliberate. I turned, already expecting to see him. There he was, hood up, face pale, pressed almost too close to the glass. His eyes were wide, staring directly at me, not blinking, not moving, just watching. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. He raised one hand slowly and placed it against the glass, then the other. It looked wrong. His fingers were too long, too thin, like they bent backwards slightly at the joints. I backed away toward the back kitchen and grabbed the phone. I called Tony. "I don't care what time it is," I said, my voice shaking. There's some guy out here and he's been coming back almost every night. He's watching me. Tony sounded groggy. Call the cops if it's that serious, he muttered. We don't need another lawsuit if you panic and hit someone. I hung up. I didn't want to involve the police. Something told me this wasn't normal, wasn't someone who could be dealt with like that. I peeked back around the corner. He was gone. I didn't see him again for a few days, and I started to relax, convincing myself maybe it had been some drugged-out guy who moved on. Then the power went out. It was a Friday night, busy until about 10. After the last customer left, I started cleaning as usual. Right around 11:30, everything flickered. The lights died. The coolers stopped humming. The emergency lights blinked on, dim red bulbs casting shadows over everything. And then, dead silence. Not even the sound of rain outside. I stood still. My phone had a flashlight, so I turned it on and slowly made my way to the front to check the breaker. Just before I reached the register, I noticed something strange on the glass. Handprints. 2 of them. Wet, long-fingered, smudging down the door like someone had been dragging their hands slowly down the glass. I didn't even check the breaker. I grabbed my backpack, went straight out the back exit, and got into my car. I didn't even lock up. I just left. Tony called the next day, furious. I told him what happened. He didn't believe me, of course. You think someone got inside with no broken locks, no signs of forced entry? You're watching too many movies, man, he said. Security footage didn't show anyone. I demanded to see the footage myself. He reluctantly agreed and pulled it up from the back office. There was footage of me cleaning, the lights flickering, then complete darkness. That's when it got weird. For a full minute, the video was just black, the screen humming with white noise. Then, faintly, just barely visible, a shape moved behind the counter. Not a person. It was crawling. Thin limbs, jerky movements. It scurried low along the floor, pausing just before the camera cut to static. Tony paled. He didn't say anything, just closed the laptop and rubbed his temples. You probably messed with the recording somehow, he mumbled. He didn't fire me, but he stopped scheduling me for night shifts. One of the new guys, Lucas, took over my slot. Young, cocky, full of jokes. I warned him. He laughed. 3 weeks later, he didn't show up for his shift. No one's seen him since. The police came, of course. They found his car in the lot, keys still in the ignition, the driver's door wide open. No signs of a struggle. Nothing missing from the store. The camera footage showed him cleaning, joking into his phone, then static, and that was it. They questioned all of us, but nothing came of it. Tony eventually quit and moved out of state. The store stayed open for a while, but went through a rotating door of employees. I still live nearby and drive past it sometimes, but I never stop. The windows are always spotless. Too spotless, like they're cleaned from the outside every night. And every now and then, if you slow down and look closely, you can still see handprints on the glass. Pressed hard, long fingers stretched impossibly wide. Waiting. Story, the end. It was one of those quiet nights that didn't feel right from the start. I was working the closing shift at a Subway restaurant just off the highway in a small Georgia town. I had been there about 8 months. Nothing about the job was glamorous, but it paid the bills. The store sat in a half-abandoned strip mall with only a vape shop and a laundromat still operating. After 9 p.m., the whole area felt deserted, except for the occasional trucker or local drifter who'd wander in. That night, I was alone. Normally, there'd be 2 of us to close, me and either Jacob or Bry. But Jacob had called in sick and Bry had quit the week before after a weird encounter with a guy who stared at her through the window for almost an hour without saying a word. I didn't blame her. The cameras didn't catch his face clearly, and the cops didn't do much. Said he hadn't broken any laws. But she swore he followed her home. After that, she never came back. I started closing up around 10:30. Official closing time was 11, but we rarely had customers that late. I was refilling the sauces when I heard the front door chime. I looked up, expecting some weary traveler needing a quick bite. Instead, it was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood pulled up, and he had gloves on. That stood out immediately. It was late June, and even at night, it was warm. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there staring at the menu like he was trying to remember how to read. I greeted him casually. "Evenin'. Let me know if you need help picking something." He didn't respond, just stood there with his head tilted slightly. After a long moment, he walked up to the counter. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. "I want a cold cut combo." "All right," I said, pulling on gloves. "What kind of bread?" He paused, then said, "Italian." As I started preparing it, I noticed he was watching my hands very closely. Not in the usual make sure they don't screw up my order way, but like he was studying every movement. When I asked him what kind of cheese, he didn't answer right away. Then he said, "None." "Okay, veggies?" Still nothing. "Lettuce? Tomato?" He finally said, "Just meat. Nothing else." I nodded and wrapped it up. "That'll be $6.52. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and change. His fingers were shaking as he handed it to me. Not like he was cold, like he was struggling to stay in control. I gave him his change and handed over the sandwich. He took it and stood there, not moving. "Everything okay, sir?" I asked. He looked up at me then. That's when I saw his eyes. They were off. Bloodshot, but not from tiredness or drugs. There was something wild in them, unfocused, like he was barely tethered to reality. He smiled then, just a small twitch of the lips. Not a friendly smile, more like someone who remembered something awful and enjoyed it. Without another word, he turned and left the store. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and tried to shake it off. I told myself he was just some guy down on his luck. Maybe a little mentally unstable. I'd seen a few like that come through before. I locked the front door after he left and turned off the open sign. There was still cleanup to do. Mopping, taking out trash, doing the dishes. But I felt a little on edge. I kept glancing at the front windows, even though the blinds were mostly closed. About 20 minutes later, I took out the garbage to the dumpster behind the store. There weren't any lights back there, so I had to use the flashlight on my phone. The second I stepped outside, I felt it again, that sensation like something was wrong. You know how sometimes your body picks up on danger before your mind does? That's how it felt. I froze halfway to the dumpster and slowly scanned the area with my phone's light. Nothing. I threw the bags in and turned to go back inside when I heard something, a scraping sound, like gravel underfoot. It was faint but distinct. I turned my light toward the far side of the lot. Again, nothing. But the hairs on my arms were standing straight up. I didn't run. I didn't want to. But I walked fast and kept my light moving. When I got back inside, I locked the door immediately and pulled the blinds tighter. I finished the rest of the cleanup quickly, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. At around 11:30, I started counting the till and closing out the register. That's when the lights flickered. Just once, for a split second, but enough to make me stop counting. And then I heard the back door rattle. No one uses the back door after hours. It locks from the inside and there's a bolt on it we always keep fastened. I grabbed the large bread knife from the prep counter, not that I really thought it would help if someone broke in, and walked toward the back. I stood there, barely breathing, listening. Nothing. I was about to turn around when the door rattled again, harder this time. The bolt held. But now I was panicking. I turned off the back lights so whoever was out there couldn't see in. Then I crept to the manager's office and locked myself inside. I dialed the police. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. I told them someone was trying to get in through the back. The dispatcher said they'd send a car out right away. Then she asked me if the person had a weapon. "I don't know," I whispered. "But he's been acting weird, Mel. I think he's the guy who came in earlier." "Stay on the line," she said. That's when I heard the front door rattle. I almost dropped the phone. I had locked that door. I know I had. But now I was doubting myself. Maybe I got distracted. Maybe I didn't turn the key all the way. Maybe I'd forgotten. But I swear I had. I stayed in the office for what felt like forever. Then I heard a loud bang from the front, a thudding impact, like someone had thrown their shoulder into the glass. I whispered what I was hearing to the dispatcher. "Officers are almost there," she said. "Just stay put." The banging came again. This time it sounded like the whole front window shook. I could hear the aluminum frame vibrating, then silence, and then the chime. The door had opened. I covered my mouth to keep from making any sound. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking toward the prep area, then the rustling of something being moved, the sound of something being dragged across the counter. I whispered into the phone, "He's inside." I need you to stay calm. Officers are on the scene now. Do not leave the office until they come get you. I heard a voice then, muffled but close. Where are you? It wasn't a question. It was said almost playfully, like someone calling out in a game of hide and seek. I could hear him moving around, drawers opening, a plastic container being dropped. The footsteps got closer to the office door. Then silence. Then a tap. One slow, deliberate tap on the office door. I held my breath. He didn't try the handle, just stood there. Then I heard a siren outside. Faint at first, then louder. The man must have heard it too, because I heard him move, fast, toward the front. Something fell and crashed, maybe a tray. Then the chime again. When the police opened the office door minutes later, I was still clutching the bread knife. The man was gone. They found no sign of forced entry on the back door, but the front? The lock had been picked. That's what they told me later. He had tools, gloves, a small lockpick kit found just outside near the bushes. They reviewed the footage, but the cameras had glitched out for 10 minutes, from 11:28 to 11:38, exactly the time he'd been inside. The footage before the glitch showed the man pacing outside, just standing near the front, staring through the blinds. When the feed came back, he was gone. No exit, no trace. Like he'd vanished. I quit that job the next day. They offered me extra pay to stay, but I couldn't. I still dream about those eyes sometimes. That moment he tapped the door. Where are you? Story the end. I started working at the Subway restaurant on the edge of our small town just after finishing high school. It wasn't anything glamorous, just sandwiches, footlongs, cookies, the usual, but it paid better than most local gigs, and the place was only a 15-minute walk from home. My shifts were usually in the evenings, sometimes closing, and I liked it that way. It was quiet, not too busy, and it gave me time to think while prepping veggies or cleaning up. The location was a little isolated, right off the highway, with an abandoned strip mall next to it. The Subway shared a small plaza with a 24-hour laundromat and a liquor store that closed by 10. By the time my shift ended at 11:30 p.m., the entire area felt deserted. It should have felt peaceful, but after a few months, something started to feel off about the place. The first time I noticed anything strange was in early December. It was around 10:45 p.m. and I was doing the usual end-of-day cleaning, scraping the bread trays, wiping down the counter, and shutting down the toaster. Our manager, a middle-aged guy named Trevor, had left early, trusting me to close alone. I didn't mind. He usually did that once or twice a week. I was standing at the sink, scrubbing the containers we use for veggies, when I heard the front door chime. Bing, like always. I looked up, surprised. No one was supposed to come in that late, and I had already turned the sign to closed. There was no one there. I walked out to the front and checked the door. It was shut, locked. I peered outside, scanning the parking lot. Not a single car. The wind rattled a loose metal sign by the laundromat. It wasn't strong enough to push open the door. I shook my head, chalking it up to the wind or maybe a faulty sensor in the door. I went back to cleaning. The chime sounded again. This time I turned around instantly, but the door remained shut. No one outside. No shadows. No wind. I stood still, holding the dripping plastic tray in my hands, heart thumping harder than it should have. There was an eerie stillness in the air, like something holding its breath. I tried to shake the feeling, told myself I was just tired, and hurried to finish up. When I left that night, I practically jogged home. The next few shifts were uneventful, but something began changing. It was subtle at first. Small items like the salt shaker or napkin holders would be out of place when I came back from the restroom. Once the toaster oven turned on by itself and ran for a full cycle with no one near it. I laughed it off to coworkers, saying the store was haunted. We joked about Subway Steve, our imaginary ghost who couldn't get enough of turkey footlongs. But the jokes stopped one night when Kayla, one of the day shift girls, came in early to drop something off before her morning shift. She walked into the back and found me sitting on a crate in the storage room with the lights off. She flipped on the light and freaked out when she saw me. "What the hell, Eric? Are you okay?" I looked up, confused. I had no memory of sitting down. The last thing I remembered was mopping the front floor. I blinked hard. My back hurt and my hands were trembling. I glanced at the wall clock. 2:20 a.m. I was supposed to leave at 11:30. I must have fallen asleep. I mumbled, but Kayla was already dialing Trevor. After that, Trevor insisted I never work alone again. For a few weeks, he paired me with another guy named Carlos, who worked fast and talked a lot. The weird stuff stopped when Carlos was around. No more door chimes, no more misplaced items, no more lost time. But one Friday night, Carlos called in sick, and no one else could cover. Trevor asked if I'd be okay alone just this once. I hesitated, but eventually said yes. That night, the restaurant felt different. I turned the music on louder than usual just to drown out the silence. Around 10:15, I was slicing cucumbers when I heard the back door creak. We never use the back door. It stays bolted and deliveries come through the front. I walked to the back room, heart pounding. The bolt was still in place. Nothing was open. I was about to turn around when I heard something shift behind the boxes of chips and drink crates. A low shuffle, like someone dragging their foot. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. I picked up a broom and slowly walked into the storage area. My throat was dry, and every step echoed way too loudly. I nudged the boxes aside. Nothing there. As I exhaled, the power cut out. Everything went pitch black except for the green glow of the emergency exit sign. The silence was thick, almost pressurized. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the room. That's when I saw it. On the far wall, where there should have been just plain tiles, was something written in sauce. Maybe ketchup or sriracha. It was thick, dark, and messy. "Don't stay." My stomach dropped. I backed up slowly, then turned and ran to the front. I reached for the phone to call Trevor, but the line was dead. The cell signal was gone too. Just one blinking bar that wouldn't load anything. I grabbed my jacket, keys, and was about to bolt when the front door chimed again. I froze. The sign still said closed. The doors were locked. I turned slowly toward the sound, and through the glass I saw a man. He was tall, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. His hands were pressed against the glass. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel him watching me. My legs wouldn't move. Then he knocked. Softly. Once. Twice. 3 times. I darted to the back, deciding to hide until he left. I wedged myself behind the stack of pickle buckets, holding my breath. Then the chime rang again. I nearly screamed. I hadn't unlocked the door. I stayed there, shaking, listening for footsteps. But there was nothing. Just silence. Eventually, I forced myself up and crept toward the front again. The man was gone. But something was sitting on the counter. A sandwich. A fully made sandwich, wrapped neatly and placed perfectly in the center of the prep area. I hadn't made it. I didn't even have gloves on, hadn't touched bread in over an hour. I unwrapped it slowly. It was tuna. Double jalapenos, black olives, extra mayo. I stared at it for a long time. Then the smell hit me. It was rancid, like sewage mixed with rot. I gagged and backed away, bumping into the sink. That's when I noticed the cameras. We had 4 of them, one in the front, 2 behind the counter, and one facing the back room. I ran to the office and pulled up the footage. The timestamp showed the sandwich being made 5 minutes earlier. There was no one on screen. I watched in paralyzed horror as the sandwich floated across the line, ingredients stacking themselves, the bread opened by itself. The containers popped open, mayo squirted into midair, and then for a single frame, one single frame, there was a figure. Black hoodie, no face, just static where a head should be. The lights came back on. I turned off the camera monitor, grabbed my bag, and left everything behind. I ran all the way home. The next morning, Trevor called, furious. The store was left unlocked. Lights were on. Food was still out. But I didn't care. I told him I quit. He tried to convince me to stay, even offered a raise. Said maybe I was overworked. I didn't respond. But a week later, Kayla sent me a message. "Did you leave something behind?" she wrote. Attached was a picture. It was the sandwich. The same one. Still sitting in the same spot untouched. But the note was new. Written in mayo on the paper wrapper. "You forgot something." Story the end. I started working at the subway near the I-40 exit just outside of Little Rock back in 2016. I was 23, working 2 jobs and trying to save up enough to move out of my cousin's place. The subway gig was supposed to be temporary. My shift was 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., usually on weekdays because that was when nobody else wanted to work. The location sat on the edge of a half-abandoned strip mall, and the only other open business nearby was a 24-hour gas station next door. You could say it was quiet, but honestly, it just felt forgotten. My manager, Ron, was in his 50s, and looked like someone who had given up on life decades ago. He didn't talk much and gave off this twitchy, irritable energy that made everyone nervous. The other employees rotated constantly, either quitting or getting fired within a few weeks. By my second month, I was the most senior staff on nights. Most of the time, I was left alone after 10 p.m., and that's when things started getting strange. It was subtle at first, items going missing, bags of bread, boxes of gloves, a single tub of olives. I thought maybe someone from the day shift was being lazy or careless, but then I noticed stuff reappearing too. One night, I opened the fridge and found an entire tray of pre-cut onions that I hadn't sliced. Another night, a mop I knew I had left against the wall was standing up in the corner of the bathroom, as if someone had just used it. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I asked Ron if he thought someone had keys and was sneaking in after hours. He just looked at me. "We've had the locks changed twice in 6 months," he said. "If you're seeing something, maybe get more sleep." That rubbed me the wrong way, but I let it go. Until the first night I saw her. It was a Tuesday, a quiet one. I remember because it was the night after a tornado warning, and the town was still cleaning up fallen trees. There had been no customers for over an hour. I was standing near the sink, cleaning the metal trays, when I caught a glimpse of someone in the reflection of the oven window behind me. I turned immediately, thinking someone had walked in, but the door chime hadn't sounded. No one was there. I brushed it off as being jumpy. Maybe my reflection had moved in a weird way. I told myself I was tired, overworked. I finished up, locked up the place, and went home. The next few nights, nothing happened. But that Friday night, everything changed. It was close to midnight. I had just finished mopping the dining area. The smell of vinegar and bleach still hung in the air when I saw her again, this time clearly. She was standing in the far corner of the store, near the trash cans. Her skin was pale, like washed-out paper. She wore a green apron, almost identical to ours, but older looking, faded and stained. Her hair was stringy and black, hanging over one side of her face, and her eyes, God, her eyes were just dark hollows. I dropped the mop, frozen in place. She didn't move, didn't blink. I reached for my phone, but as soon as I looked down to grab it, she was gone. I didn't clean the rest of the night. I sat behind the counter, watching the monitors. Nothing appeared. I went home at 1 a.m. sharp and barely slept. The next night, I brought it up to Ron. "You ever hear anything weird about this store?" I asked. He didn't even look up from the papers he was pretending to sort. "You're not the first one to ask," he said after a pause. "This place, it's got history." "What kind of history?" He sighed and finally met my eyes. Back in '08, before corporate remodeled everything, there was a girl. She worked the night shift, just like you. Her name was Kelsey. One night, she just disappeared. No signs of a break-in. Her car was still in the lot. Her purse was in the back office. It was like she just vanished into thin air. I asked if they ever found her. Ron shook his head. The cameras glitched that night. Corporate sent some IT guys to check it out, but the footage was just static from 11:47 p.m. until 2:12 a.m., and then nothing. I felt cold all over. "You ever see anything here?" Ron's expression darkened. "I don't stay past 10. Never have. Never will." I asked why the hell he never told me that before, and all he said was, some things you need to see for yourself. I should have quit then. I really should have. But I was desperate for money, and something about the story pulled at me like I needed to know more. So I stayed. I started bringing a small notebook, writing down everything unusual. The temperature would drop drastically around midnight, even though the thermostat stayed set at 72. The walk-in fridge light would flicker for no reason. One night, every single bag of chips on the rack had been turned backward while I was cleaning in the back. But the worst was the whispering. It started about 2 weeks after I saw her. At first, it sounded like a radio station playing faintly. I thought maybe someone left a phone on. But the voices weren't clear. They were murmurs, overlapping and constant, like 10 people speaking at once from a faraway room. I stood in the middle of the dining area, holding my breath. The sound was coming from the vents. I climbed onto a chair to get closer, and I swear I heard my name. I jumped down and backed away, nearly knocking over a display of cookies. That night, I didn't stay until close. I left at 12:30 and drove around town until morning. I didn't go back for 3 days. I texted Ron and said I had the flu. When I finally returned, the store was a mess. Trash cans overflowing. Bathrooms filthy. Someone had knocked over the tea dispenser, and no one had cleaned it. Ron didn't ask where I'd been. He just handed me the keys and left. That shift, the voices were louder. I turned the music on the store speakers to drown them out. I worked faster than usual, determined to keep my eyes off the corners of the room. At 12:12 a.m., the front door chime went off. I hadn't seen anyone outside. The door opened slowly, and a cold breeze rolled in. But no one entered. I stepped around the counter and cautiously approached the door. I looked outside. Nothing. Then I turned back and saw something that made my blood freeze. All the bread trays were full. I hadn't baked any that night. They'd all been empty, cooling racks bare. But now every slot was filled with fresh loaves. And not just fresh, perfect, like out of a commercial. I stepped closer and noticed something off. The bread didn't smell right. It looked golden brown, sure, but it smelled like damp soil and copper. I reached out to touch one, but as soon as my fingers brushed the crust, I saw movement behind the sneeze guard. Kelsey. Her face was pressed against the glass from inside the prep line, her hands flat against the inside of the steel counter. Her eyes were wide and her mouth was open, like she was screaming, but no sound came out. I stumbled back, knocking over the cutting board. The lights flickered. The radio went dead. When I looked again, she was gone. So was the bread. The next morning, I went straight to Ron's office before leaving. "I'm done," I told him. "I'm not working here another night." He didn't look surprised. "You'll be paid through the week," he said. "Do yourself a favor, don't come back." I didn't. 6 months later, I heard the subway had shut down. Corporate pulled the lease. A friend of mine who worked for the cleaning crew said the back freezer was found wide open one morning, and the words "let me out" were scratched into the inside wall over and over, deep enough to cut into the insulation. They said the damage looked like fingernails. They bricked over the building eventually. No new store, no demolition, just silence. I still dream of her sometimes, standing behind the counter, watching, waiting, and I wonder if she's still in there, if she ever left. Story. The end. I started working at the subway near the interstate in early 2021, just a few months after moving back home to help my mom with bills. It wasn't the kind of job I ever pictured myself doing long term, but after COVID shut down the cafe I used to work at, I didn't have many options. Subway was always hiring, especially at the location just off Highway 53. The hours sucked, but the store manager, Alyssa, was fair and the other staff were decent. Most of my shifts were at night, starting at 6 p.m. and ending at midnight. It was one of those locations that saw a strange mix of customers. Truckers, teenagers, people stopping through from out of town. Being so close to the highway, it kind of operated like a forgotten corner of the world. People came in, passed through, and were gone, sometimes forever. The first month passed without incident. I kept my head down, learned the ropes, and got used to the quiet hum of the ovens and the cool fluorescent lights that gave the place its sterile, slightly depressing glow. Everything was standard until we hired a new guy named Travis. He was about my age, maybe a year or two older. Thin, wiry build, a little too eager in that way people are when they're trying too hard to make friends. I didn't dislike him, but something about him never sat quite right. He asked too many personal questions, always wanted to hang out after work, even if I told him I was tired. Alyssa paired us together for closing shifts pretty often. One night in mid-April, we were mopping up around 11:45 when a man came in. He was older, mid-50s maybe, wore a tattered army green jacket and a stained ball cap. His eyes were sharp, almost glassy, like he was too alert for that hour of night. The first thing I noticed was that he didn't speak when he walked in. Just stood there, staring at the menu for a solid minute. "Hey, what can I get started for you?" I asked, grabbing gloves. He just stared at me. "Foot-long or 6-inch?" I offered again more carefully. Still nothing. Finally, Travis stepped up beside me. "Sir, we close in 15. If you want something, you gotta order it now." That seemed to break whatever fog he was in. He looked at us and muttered, "Cold cut, wheat bread." As I began pulling the bread, I realized his hands were trembling. Not a little tremble either, violent shaking. When I looked up at his face, I saw beads of sweat glistening on his forehead, even though it was cool inside. "Are you all right?" I asked, pausing. He didn't answer. When I finished the sandwich and handed it over the counter, he grabbed it with a jerking motion, dropped a crumpled 20 on the counter without waiting for change, and walked to the corner booth. That was odd in itself. Most people took their food and left at that hour, especially if they were alone. "What the hell was that about?" Travis whispered once the man sat down, facing the wall. I didn't respond. Something about the guy made me uneasy. I kept looking over as we cleaned, half expecting him to fall over or start mumbling to himself. But he just sat there, holding the sandwich in his hands, not eating, not moving, staring at the booth wall. We finished closing a few minutes after midnight. I wiped down the counter, and Travis went to lock the door. That's when we realized the man was gone. Not walked out, gone. The door had never chimed again. I checked the booths, empty. His sandwich was still there, untouched, resting on a napkin. I looked under the table, even checked the bathroom. Nothing. Travis and I stood in the dining room, both of us confused. "No way he left without triggering the door," I said. "It beeps every time. Maybe it glitched." "Still," I said, "you don't just vanish." We watched the security footage. At 11:47, he enters, orders, sits. At 12:02, the camera glitched, just for a second, maybe two. The booth was empty. The sandwich still there, untouched. I zoomed in on the footage, going frame by frame. In one of the frames during the glitch, I saw something I'll never forget. The man was standing, facing the camera, except his face. His face was wrong. It was twisted, mouth open wide, not like he was screaming, but like it had been stretched. His eyes were rolled back, and his arms were lifted, bent unnaturally. The frame after that, he was gone. Travis didn't say anything. We both stood there, frozen. After that night, I tried to write it off as a corrupted video or a sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me. But that same booth, the corner one, started to feel different. Whenever I worked, I avoided it. About a week later, I was working alone. Travis had called in sick, and Alyssa was at the other location. It was a Thursday. Slow night. I was just finishing mopping when I heard it. A whisper. It was so faint I thought it might have been the AC. But then I heard it again. "Hey." I turned. The dining area was empty. I walked toward the source of the sound, straight to the corner booth. Nothing. But on the table was a napkin, folded neatly. I know it hadn't been there when I cleaned the tables earlier. I picked it up slowly. There were words scrawled in shaky, jagged handwriting. "He's hungry." I dropped it. Every hair on my body stood up. I locked the doors early that night. I didn't care if Alyssa wrote me up. The next morning, I got a call. Travis had been found dead in his apartment. No signs of struggle, no injuries, no drugs, just dead. Sitting on the floor, holding a half-eaten cold-cut sandwich. Police said it looked like his heart had stopped. I didn't go to the funeral. I told Alyssa I needed time off, and she didn't argue. She didn't even sound surprised. 3 weeks passed before I came back. I needed money. I figured maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe the man was just mentally ill. Maybe Travis had an undiagnosed heart condition. But then I started hearing other stories from staff at other Subway locations. A girl named Lacey, who worked at a spot 2 towns over, said a man came in asking for a sandwich with nothing but meat and mayonnaise, and then sat in the bathroom for an hour before disappearing. Another guy who'd been training at the Northern Branch claimed he saw someone standing behind him in the freezer reflection, but when he turned around, no one was there. The thing that tied all the stories together? A man in a green jacket. Cold cut combo. Corner booths. And napkins. Always napkins. One night, I decided to stay late and review every piece of footage we had saved on the store's cloud system. I went back months, long before I started, and I found him, the same man, in March, in February, even a clip from the previous December, same jacket, same glassy stare, always ordering, always vanishing. One video in particular made me want to puke. It was from December 23rd, around midnight. He was in the store alone with a young female employee, Amy, I think. In the video, she makes the sandwich, hands it over. He reaches into his coat, and instead of money, he pulls out something wet and red. I couldn't tell what it was. The image quality broke down the closer I zoomed, but her reaction was clear. She froze. Then he dropped the object on the counter. She backs away slowly. The frame glitches. Then he's gone. She's on the floor, passed out. The official incident report said she had a panic attack. She quit 2 days later. The footage after that goes blank for 10 minutes. Black screen, then it returns, same empty booth, same sandwich, still untouched. The final straw came on a Saturday night. It was early June, hot and sticky. I was alone, mopping again. It was exactly 11:47 when the door chime rang. I already knew who it was. I didn't even look up. He walked in, slow, deliberate steps, and stood silently in front of the counter. I felt my hands shaking as I slipped on gloves. Cold cut combo, he said. Wheat. Just mayo? No, he said. Tonight, it's you. I looked up. His face was melting, not literally, but it looked like it was sliding. His skin sagged unnaturally. His mouth opened slowly, and I heard something low and inhuman come from deep in his throat. Not a word. A sound. Like someone dragging a rock across cement underwater. I backed away. He stepped forward. I ran, out the back door, through the parking lot. Didn't stop running until I reached the gas station across the street. When the cops arrived, the store was empty. No sign of him. But on the counter was a napkin. This one had 3 words written on it. You were spared. I never went back. I quit the next morning. The store's still open somehow. New people work there now. I've driven by a couple times. Once I saw a girl mopping inside. She looked over her shoulder, then toward the corner booth. Then she picked up a napkin. I've tried to forget it. I've tried to move on. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, the scent of mayonnaise thick in the air, and I hear that whisper again. Hey. Story the end. It was the kind of job you took because it was easy and paid decently for a part-time gig. Working the night shift at a Subway restaurant wasn't glamorous, but it was straightforward. Clean the store, make sandwiches, and lock up. The place was in a small strip mall just outside the city center, surrounded by empty parking lots and a few rundown businesses. I was 19 and working there while finishing community college. Most nights were slow and sometimes eerie, but nothing I couldn't handle. The night it all started felt like any other early autumn evening. The sun had just set, leaving behind a thick, damp chill in the air. I clocked in at 3 p.m. and started my shift. At first, the customers trickled in, mostly older folks getting dinner on their way home or teenagers stopping by for a quick snack. The night shift didn't officially start until about 7 p.m., and after that, it usually slowed down. My manager, Lisa, left right at 7 that evening, trusting me to handle the closing shift alone. I was used to it. She reminded me to call if anything weird happened, which I found a little amusing. The store was safe, well lit, and in a decent neighborhood. There wasn't much to worry about. Around 8:30 p.m., the crowd had thinned. I was wiping down the tables and restocking the napkin dispensers when I heard the front doorbell ring. I looked up to see a man walking in. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 4 or 5, with broad shoulders. He wore a dark hoodie pulled tight over his head, sunglasses, even though it was night, and black jeans. Something about him seemed off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "Hey there," I said, offering my best customer service smile. "What can I get for you?" He didn't respond, just stood in front of the counter, staring at the menu. I waited a few seconds. "Sir, are you ready to order?" Still no answer. I leaned a bit closer and saw that he wasn't blinking. His face was expressionless, pale under the dim fluorescent lighting. "Okay, I'll just need to know what you want to make your sandwich." Finally, he spoke. His voice was low and monotone. "Meatball on Italian bread, no veggies." I nodded and began preparing the sandwich. I kept glancing at him from the corner of my eye. His hands stayed in the kangaroo pocket of his hoodie. They looked thin, almost skeletal, with pale skin stretched tight over knuckles. "Anything to drink?" I asked. No response. I finished the sandwich, wrapped it, and slid it across the counter. $7.29, please." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $10 bill. I handed back the change. He didn't move. "Is there anything else you need?" He tilted his head slightly and said, "You're here alone." I swallowed hard, suddenly uncomfortable. "Yes, just me tonight." The man nodded slowly, then turned and walked out. The bell chimed softly as he exited. I exhaled and locked the door, a habit I had gotten into after a few late-night shifts. I told myself to stop overthinking it. Some people are just strange, especially at night. Around 9:15, the doorbell rang again. My heart jumped. I looked up. The man was back. Same hoodie, same sunglasses. "Sir, we're about to close," I said firmly. He said nothing, just stared. "Please leave. I have to finish cleaning." He stepped closer to the counter. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said again. My skin crawled. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently and then went out, plunging the store into darkness. The emergency lights kicked on, casting a faint red glow. I fumbled for my phone but realized it was dead. I heard the soft scraping sound of fingernails along metal coming from the back prep area. I held my breath. The sound stopped. Then I felt cold, so cold that my breath came out in visible puffs. The man was gone. I stumbled toward the back door, unlocked it, and slipped out into the alley, heart pounding. I locked the door behind me and ran to my car. I didn't stop driving until I was home. The next day, I told Lisa about it. She laughed it off but looked concerned. "That's just some weirdo," she said. "Nothing to worry about." But I did worry. Over the next week, the man kept coming back at the same time every night, never ordering, never speaking, just standing silently. One night, I found a note taped to the front door when I arrived. "I see you." My hands shook. I showed it to Lisa, but she said maybe it was a prank. But it didn't feel like a prank. The man's visits grew more frequent and unsettling. One night, he stayed until after closing, staring at me through the window even after I locked up. I called the police. They said they'd send a patrol, but no one ever came. Then things got worse. One night, as I was wiping down tables alone, I heard whispering behind me. I turned, but no one was there. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. Suddenly, all the lights went out. The emergency lighting flickered on. I saw a shadow move across the dining area. The man. But this time, his face was different. His sunglasses were gone. His eyes were pure black voids. He smiled, revealing sharp, unnatural teeth. I screamed and ran to the back exit. As I ran through the alley, I heard footsteps behind me, fast, relentless. I never looked back. The next day, I quit. I never returned. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still feel his gaze on me, watching, waiting. Story, the end. Working the night shift at a Subway restaurant seemed like a straightforward, low-stress job when I first started. I was 24, needed some steady income while finishing up community college classes, and a friend had recommended the spot. It was a small franchise store, nestled inside a fairly empty strip mall on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where foot traffic during the day was minimal, and nights were even slower. The manager, a middle-aged woman named Linda, hired me mostly because I was reliable and willing to take the late shifts nobody else wanted. The first few weeks went by without incident. I'd arrive around 4 p.m., do prep work with a couple of other employees. Then after 9 p.m., it was usually just me and whoever was closing out with me. By 10 p.m., the last customers usually trickled out. After that, I had the store pretty much to myself until midnight when the doors closed for good and I'd lock up. The routine was simple: prep, clean, restock, handle the occasional late-night customer, and close up. But after about a month on the job, the atmosphere started to change. It was subtle at first. Little things that didn't make sense, but I dismissed as me being tired. One night, while wiping down the sandwich counters, I noticed a faint tapping noise coming from the front door. I looked up and saw nothing outside. I figured it was just rain hitting the glass or maybe some small animal on the other side. But then, after the tapping stopped, I heard soft footsteps walking away down the sidewalk outside. I peeked through the glass doors, but no one was there. The place was empty. The strip mall was closed. No cars in the lot. It felt like someone was there, but hiding in the shadows. I shook off the feeling and went back to work. It was probably my imagination. The next week, I was finishing up restocking the drink fridge around 11:45 p.m., about 15 minutes before closing. That's when I heard the door chime. Ding! The sound that alerts you a customer has entered or exited. I jumped, looked toward the entrance, but the doors were locked. I checked the time. The store was supposed to be closed to customers. I checked the lock, and the door was secured tight. I double-checked the doors and windows. Nothing. No one was inside or outside. I thought maybe the sensor was faulty or some glitch in the system, but it unsettled me. After that, the incidents started happening more often. The same door chime, but no one at the door. Footsteps near the back exit when I was alone cleaning. The flicker of the fluorescent lights overhead just for a second, right when I glanced away. I mentioned some of this to Linda, who just told me to focus on work and not let the night get to my head. Sometimes you hear things, especially when you're alone, she said with a sigh. Just don't let it distract you. But one night changed everything. It was a cold, rainy Thursday around 11:30 p.m. I was closing alone, just finishing cleaning the prep tables and wiping down the sandwich toppings. The store was dead quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerators and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock on the glass door. Just one knock. I froze. No customers should be there. The store had been closed to the public for 15 minutes. I looked at the door, and there was no one visible on the other side. No shadow, no figure. The parking lot was empty, except for one car parked near the edge. I was about to call out, "Hello?" when the knock came again, louder this time. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my phone and flashlight from behind the counter, shone it out through the glass, and saw nothing. Then I noticed the car's interior light flick on and off several times. I felt a wave of dread. The knocking stopped, but I was convinced someone was watching. I locked the door behind the counter and went to the back office to call Linda, but the line was dead. I tried my cell phone, no signal. I sat in the small office with the door locked, flashlight in hand, eyes darting to every shadow. Minutes passed. Then the lights flickered and died. The emergency red exit signs buzzed on, dimly illuminating the room. I heard something outside the door. A slow, deliberate scraping sound like nails dragging against metal. I held my breath. The scraping stopped. Suddenly the front door swung open, just a crack. I shouted, "Hey, who's there?" No response. Heart pounding, I grabbed the nearby broom and edged toward the door. The rain poured in, cold and relentless. No footprints on the wet floor. No one in sight. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The power came back on a few minutes later, but my phone was still dead. I called Linda again. This time the line connected. "Linda, someone's here. They just tried to get in." She told me to stay put and that she was on her way. About 15 minutes later, a police car pulled up, flashing lights cutting through the rain. The officers searched the premises and parking lot. No one was found. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No fingerprints on the door other than mine. They left, telling me it was probably just a prank or some homeless person looking for shelter. Linda arrived shortly after, looked at me with concern. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was still outside, watching. The following week, I was scheduled for the night shift again. I didn't want to go back, but I had bills to pay. That night, I tried to stay calm, but the store felt different, like the walls were closing in. Around midnight, I was restocking the bread shelves when I heard soft whispering. Not words I could understand, just low murmurs echoing faintly. I turned around, but no one was there. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me, as if voices were moving around the store unseen. I dropped the bread bag. Heart racing, I called Linda, but again the line was dead. I ran to the front door, but the lock wouldn't budge. I was trapped inside. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the digital menu screens went black. Then, one by one, the refrigerator's doors slammed open. Cold air rushed through the store. The whispering turned into a low chanting. I felt paralyzed. I backed away toward the office. The chanting stopped. The store was silent. Minutes later, the phones came back to life. Linda's voice came through. "Are you there? What's happening?" I didn't know how to explain. When she arrived, the store was empty. I quit that night. I never went back. The Subway in that strip mall closed down a few months later. I still think about that place sometimes, about the cold whispers, the flickering lights, the invisible presence waiting just outside. Sometimes, late at night, I drive by the strip mall, and I swear I see the lights flicker behind the dark windows, like something is still waiting to get in. Story the end. The Subway restaurant where I worked was one of those places you barely think about, tucked inside a dull strip mall on the edge of town. It was a second job for me, something to pay the rent while I was finishing my last year of college. The shifts were mostly uneventful, just the usual mix of locals grabbing a quick sandwich or the occasional late-night traveler passing through. I worked the closing shift most nights, starting around 4 p.m. and finishing after midnight. One Thursday night, things started out normal. I clocked in, greeted the day crew as they left, and settled in for what I assumed would be a typical slow evening. The lunch rush was over, and the place was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge and the distant sound of cars on the nearby highway. As the evening wore on, I kept busy cleaning and prepping. Around 8 p.m., a couple came in, an older man and woman. They looked like regulars. They ordered quickly, chatted briefly, then sat down in one of the booths near the window. I glanced over now and then as I worked, but nothing about them was unusual. Then, sometime after 10 p.m., I noticed a guy standing just outside the glass doors. He was tall, thin, and wore a black hoodie that obscured his face. He stood there motionless, staring in with his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. The streetlights cast long shadows across his face, but I could tell he was watching me. I felt a sudden chill despite the warm summer night. I considered telling him we were closed, but the official closing time was still an hour away. Besides, he hadn't made a move to come inside. I tried to ignore him, telling myself he was just some kid loitering. As I cleaned the sandwich station, I kept sneaking glances at the window. The man stayed exactly where he was. Not moving, just watching. Around 10:30, a few more customers trickled in. A group of teenagers who were loud but harmless. They ordered sandwiches, laughed, then left. The man outside was still there. He hadn't budged. When the clock hit 11, I turned off the open sign. The last customer left, and I started the closing routine. Washing floors, wiping counters, taking out trash. I tried to keep my focus, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I heard it, a faint scraping noise coming from the back door area. I froze. The back door was locked and alarmed after hours. No customers ever entered through there. I put down the mop and went to check. Holding my breath, I crept to the back door and peered out through the window. No one was there. I turned the lock and tested the door. It was secure. The sound must have come from somewhere else. I walked back toward the front, and that's when I saw the man. He was inside the restaurant. I swear I had locked the front door behind the last customer, but here he was, standing near the sandwich station. His hoodie was still pulled over his head, but now I could see his face better. Pale, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His mouth was slightly open, like he was breathing heavily. He didn't say anything, just stood there. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. I took a step back toward the register, heart pounding. I considered calling the police, but decided to try to handle it myself first. "Sir, you need to leave. We're closed." He finally moved then, slowly, deliberately, walking toward me. I backed away toward the door, but he was faster. He reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was cold and surprisingly strong. "Please," he whispered hoarsely, "don't call them." I yanked my arm free and ran toward the back office, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator was calm, but my voice shook as I explained the situation. "Stay in the office. Don't open the door," she instructed. From inside, I could hear footsteps moving around the restaurant. Chairs scraping, something heavy being dragged. Then the front door opened with a loud creak. I held my breath. Minutes felt like hours. Suddenly, the sound of sirens outside. The man bolted toward the back exit. I heard the back door slam. Police officers rushed in seconds later, guns drawn. They swept the building and the surrounding area, but found nothing. No sign of the man. I was shaken, but unharmed. The police told me the man had a history of break-ins and mental illness. They warned me to be careful, especially working alone. I never worked alone at that Subway again. And some nights when I close up late, I swear I see that figure lurking just outside the windows, watching. Story the end. The first day I started working at Subway was exactly what I expected. Loud sandwich orders, the steady clatter of the bread toaster, the smell of fresh veggies and meats, and the steady drip of the soda machine. It was a pretty small location, just a few blocks off the interstate, tucked between a gas station and a convenience store. The manager, Janet, was a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s who ran the place like a tight ship. The rest of the crew were mostly teenagers like me, trying to earn some extra cash while in school or college. My shift was from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., 6 days a week. Most days were uneventful. Customers came and went, mostly locals grabbing a quick dinner or late-night snack. The first month flew by. I got good at making sandwiches fast and keeping the station clean. I was comfortable working late, especially since the shift got quieter around 9:30 p.m. That all changed one night, about 6 weeks in. It was a Tuesday, one of the slower nights. I was alone on the closing shift. Janet trusted me enough to let me close solo since I was a dependable worker. Around 10:30 p.m., a cold wind rattled the front door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I was wiping down the sandwich counter, humming along to the soft pop music playing on the radio. Suddenly, the door chime rang. Odd. Usually after 10, no one came in. I glanced toward the glass, expecting to see a late customer, but no one was there. The parking lot was empty, except for a lone pickup truck about 50 feet away. I shrugged, thinking maybe someone had just walked by and triggered the sensor. The chime rang again, this time a little louder. I turned toward the door quickly. Still, no one. A creeping feeling crawled up my spine. I tried to laugh it off, but the silence in the restaurant felt heavier all of a sudden. I kept wiping, but my hands trembled just a bit. I was about to turn off the toaster oven when the lights flickered. They dimmed for a moment, then returned to normal. A few seconds later, the chime rang again. I spun around, eyes wide, heart pounding. Still no one at the door. Okay, very funny, I muttered, half expecting some coworker to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But I was alone. I went to the back to check the security cameras. The monitors flickered, but all 4 cameras showed nothing unusual. No one entered the store. I sat down in the office chair, trying to calm my nerves. That's when the strange sounds began. From somewhere deep in the kitchen, I heard a scraping noise, like metal scraping against metal. It wasn't constant, more like an irregular scratch. Pause, scratch, pause. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and crept toward the prep area. No one was there. The knives and spoons were in place. The bread trays were empty. No sign of movement. I stood still, the scratching sounds continuing softly behind the bread ovens. I pulled open the oven door, shining my light inside. Empty. I let out a shaky breath and closed the oven. Suddenly, the prep lights above flickered off, plunging the area into darkness. My heart jumped. I fumbled for the flashlight and turned it on again. The beam landed on the sandwich counter. There, sitting perfectly on the clean surface, was a sandwich. It hadn't been there a moment ago. The bread was fresh, the lettuce crisp, the tomatoes sliced neatly. But there was no way I'd made it. My station was spotless, and I hadn't started any new orders. My hands shook as I reached for the sandwich. A sudden coldness filled the air, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. I turned toward the door to leave, but it was locked tight. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Outside was quiet. Too quiet. Then the sandwich wrapper crinkled. I jumped back. The sandwich shifted on the counter. It slid a few inches toward me, as if pushed by an invisible hand. I stumbled back, heart racing. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. The restaurant was plunged into pitch black. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket and switched on the flashlight. The beam swept across the counter, no sandwich. But I could hear the wrapper rustling again, faint but unmistakable. My phone flickered, and then the battery drained suddenly. I dropped it in panic. The lights flickered back on. The sandwich was back, wrapped and untouched. My legs carried me toward the door, and I jiggled the handle. Locked. I looked toward the security monitor, which powered on by itself. Static lines obscured the image. And then, for a split second, the screen showed a figure. Tall, wearing a hoodie. No face. Only static where it should be. I screamed and slammed the monitor off. I ran to the phone to call Janet, but the line was dead. The radio on the counter crackled and then hissed. Then a whisper. Don't stay. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I scrambled out the back exit, running into the night. The next day, Janet told me the power had gone out briefly, and that there had been reports of vandalism around the strip mall. I told her I was quitting. She laughed it off, but I never went back. A few weeks later, another employee reported seeing someone in the parking lot at night, only to find it empty when they looked. Sometimes I swear I can still hear that sandwich wrapper rustling when the wind blows just right. Story the end. The Subway restaurant where I worked was tucked into a small strip mall on the edge of town, not far from the bus station. It wasn't the busiest location, but it was a steady spot, with a regular crowd of truck drivers, late shift workers, and the occasional student stopping by after classes or on their way home. I got the job in the summer of 2019, mostly because I needed cash after dropping out of college for a while. I figured it was easy enough work, build sandwiches, take orders, clean up, and the hours were flexible. I'd been working there a few weeks when the weird stuff started happening. It began small, like things moving slightly out of place or odd noises in the back room. The staff joked about the place being haunted, but I didn't really buy it. It's a subway, after all, not exactly a hotspot for paranormal activity. Our shifts often ran late. I usually worked the closing shift from 6 p.m. to midnight. The store got eerily quiet after 10, with only a handful of customers and sometimes none at all. The lights were harsh and fluorescent, the air conditioning humming constantly, mixing with the occasional beeping of the ovens and the clatter of the sandwich prep. One night, it was just me and the manager, a woman named Rachel who'd been working there for years. Around 11:30, a man walked in. He was tall, skinny, and wore a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. He looked tired, maybe homeless or just beaten down by life. His eyes flicked nervously around the store as he shuffled to the counter. "I'll have a 6-inch turkey, no cheese, on wheat," he said, voice low and shaky. Rachel nodded, started preparing the sandwich while I rang him up. The man seemed agitated, glancing at the door every few seconds like he was afraid someone was outside. As Rachel finished, the man reached into his pocket, pulled out crumpled bills, and handed them over. Suddenly, he froze. His eyes widened as he looked past us toward the dining area. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping closer. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just wait." He turned slowly and walked toward the corner booth by the window, sitting down abruptly and pulling the sandwich close to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him safe. Rachel and I exchanged a glance, but didn't say anything. We figured maybe he was just having a rough night. Minutes passed. Then I heard it. Faint scratching sounds like nails scraping against the walls coming from the back storage room. I went to check but found nothing unusual, just the usual boxes of bread and supplies. When I came back, the man was gone. The sandwich was still there on the table, untouched. No sign of him anywhere. No one had seen him leave. That night stuck with me. The next day, Rachel told me the man had been spotted several times near the bus station in the past few weeks, always looking like he was running from something. Nobody knew his name. Days later, the weirdness escalated. I was closing alone when the lights flickered and the ovens shut off mid-cycle. The store went silent, except for the hum of the fridge. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, though no one was outside. I rushed to check, but the parking lot was empty. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. The restaurant had a small office above the kitchen where the regional manager sometimes worked, but we didn't have anyone scheduled there after hours. I called Rachel, who said she'd be over immediately. While I waited, I grabbed a broom and cautiously headed toward the stairs. The steps creaked under my weight, but the hallway was empty. No sign of anyone. As I turned to leave, a cold gust of air brushed past me, even though all the windows and doors were shut tight. The hairs on my neck stood up. Rachel arrived a few minutes later. I told her what happened, but she just frowned. "Look, this place is old. Plumbing issues, faulty wiring, probably just the building settling." I wanted to believe her, but something about that night gnawed at me. A few nights later, while I was working late again, I heard whispering coming from the dining area. I looked up and saw a shadow moving quickly across the far wall, though the lights were on and no one was there. Trying to stay calm, I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer, just silence. I checked the cameras on my phone. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, in the corner booth, I saw something flicker on the monitor. A brief glimpse of a pale figure sitting there, hunched over. I blinked, and it was gone. I told Rachel the next day, but she seemed annoyed. "Stop messing with your head. This job is hard enough without you imagining ghosts." Weeks went by and the strange incidents continued. Customers complained about cold spots at their tables or feeling watched. Some employees refused to work late shifts. One night around 11:45, I was alone, restocking the soda machine. The front door chimed. I looked up, expecting a customer, but the entrance was empty. Then from behind me, I heard a voice whisper my name. I spun around. Nobody there. The voice came again, closer this time. "Help me." I froze, heart pounding. I backed toward the counter, phone in hand, ready to call Rachel. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped my wrist. I screamed and pulled away, running toward the door. Outside, the parking lot was empty, the streetlights flickering in the fog. The next day, Rachel called me into the office. "We're closing the store," she said. "There have been too many strange things. Customers are scared. Employees are quitting. The corporate office wants an investigation." I didn't argue. I was relieved. On my last night, I stayed late, trying to understand what was happening. I sat in the corner booth, the one where the shadow had appeared. I closed my eyes and waited. Minutes passed. Then I felt a presence beside me, cold and heavy. A whisper floated over my shoulder. "Don't leave me here." I opened my eyes and saw a faint figure sitting next to me. A man, worn and broken, his eyes pleading. I asked, "Who are you?" He looked away, shaking his head. "Why are you here?" He whispered, "Trapped." I blinked and he vanished. After the store closed, the location remained empty for months. Rumors spread about the place being haunted by a lost soul, someone who never made it out. I never went back. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, waiting for someone to listen. Story the end. Working the late-night shift at Subway was supposed to be just another easy job during college, something to help pay the bills without too much stress. I got hired at a location near the outskirts of a mid-sized city, where the night crew mostly consisted of me and sometimes one other person. The store was tucked into a small strip mall, a bit run down, with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed incessantly. At first, I thought the late-night hours would be relaxing. There weren't many customers, and it was mostly routine cleaning and restocking. But from the very beginning, there was something about that Subway that didn't sit right with me. The manager, Jerry, was an older guy who'd worked there for years. He was quiet and kept to himself, but he gave off this vibe that he had seen things he didn't want to talk about. I asked him once if anything strange ever happened during the night shifts, and he just looked at me and said, "You don't want to know." I brushed it off as small-town superstition. One of the first odd things happened about a week into my job. I was working alone around 2:30 a.m., wiping down the sandwich prep area when I heard the faint sound of the door chime. I looked up and saw the front door, locked, no customers. The lights outside were dim and the parking lot was empty except for a single older model car parked near the far end. I figured it might have been a glitch or a stray noise, but then I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps moving from the front door toward the kitchen, but when I looked, nothing was there. Just my reflection in the glass. That same night, as I prepared to close, I noticed that the walk-in freezer door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it earlier. The room was pitch black inside, and the temperature dropped sharply as I opened the door. There was nothing inside that shouldn't be, just frozen vegetables and bread, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been inside. Over the next few nights, things escalated. Lights flickered without explanation. The sound of quiet whispering echoed from the vents. The smell of something rotten lingered near the trash cans, though I emptied them thoroughly every shift. Once, I found the bread loaves stacked oddly, as if someone had been messing with them, but the security cameras showed no one else in the store. One night, around 3 a.m., I was making a sandwich when I saw a figure standing near the back prep station in the corner of my eye. When I turned to look, it vanished. The figure looked like a woman in a Subway apron, but her face was pale and expressionless, almost ghostly. I told Jerry, but he just sighed and said, "She's been here a long time. Some things don't leave." Curious and creeped out, I did some digging and found out that years ago, a young woman named Lisa had worked the night shift at that exact Subway location. One night, she had disappeared without a trace. The police never found her, and the store had a period of closure after the incident. I started having nightmares about Lisa, her face staring at me silently, her hands reaching out. I could hear her voice whispering for help. One particularly terrifying night, the power cut out just after midnight, plunging the store into darkness. I grabbed my phone for light and heard the unmistakable sound of the walk-in freezer door creaking open slowly. The temperature dropped instantly, and I could see my breath misting in the cold air. Suddenly, the freezer light flickered on and off rapidly. Then a shadowy figure appeared, standing motionless behind the glass door. It was Lisa. Her eyes were hollow, and she reached out a hand toward me. I screamed and ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The locks had engaged automatically during the blackout. Panic set in as I pounded on the glass, screaming for help. After what felt like an eternity, the power came back on and the door unlocked. I fled the store and never went back. Jerry told me later that Lisa's spirit was trapped there, unable to move on. Some nights, she would appear to new night shift workers, begging for help that never comes. The subway eventually shut down for good, and the building remains abandoned. Sometimes, late at night when I drive by, I swear I see a faint light inside the dark storefront and a pale figure standing behind the counter, silently watching. Story the end. The subway where I worked was in a small town just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't the busiest place. You could count the customers on one hand during the late night shifts, but that didn't stop weird things from happening. I took the graveyard shift, usually from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. because it paid a little extra. The manager was an older guy named Mark, who had been there forever and warned me right from the start that nights were different. I didn't believe him. The first couple of weeks were uneventful, but I did notice something odd about the layout of the building. The back door to the kitchen, which was supposed to be locked after hours, sometimes appeared slightly open when I arrived. I'd always close it, assuming someone forgot or maybe it didn't latch properly. One night, I found footprints in the back hallway, wet and muddy, leading away from the door into the storage room. Nobody else was supposed to be in the building after closing. I told Mark, and he shrugged it off. Old building, he said. Probably rats or some dumb kids messing around. One night around 2 a.m., I was cleaning the sandwich station when the doorbell chimed. I looked up, and a man was standing there, soaked from the rain, looking tired and worn. He ordered a foot-long turkey on wheat with extra lettuce, no tomatoes, no onions. Nothing weird about that. But the moment I turned to grab the bread, I felt this coldness sweep through the room like an icy breath. When I looked back, the man was gone. I checked outside. No one in the parking lot, no cars parked nearby, no footprints in the wet pavement. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I was shaken, but figured it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. The next day, I asked Mark if anyone matching that description had come in recently. He said no one. That same week, the power flickered repeatedly. Sometimes the lights in the dining area would dim, then brighten suddenly. I blamed the aging electrical system. But then came the knocking. It started quietly. A soft, rhythmic tap on the glass of the front door, always around 3:13 a.m., like clockwork. I checked every time, but no one was ever there. One night, determined to catch whoever was doing it, I stayed near the door after locking up the sandwich station. At exactly 3:13, the knocking started. I opened the door quickly, but again, nothing. Just rain. I looked down and noticed something smeared on the ground. A single, muddy handprint. It was weird. Too big for a child, too long and narrow for an adult. It was almost unnatural. Then the knocking moved to the back door. I froze. The back door was locked and bolted, but the knocking came from the other side, slow and deliberate. I didn't want to check, but I had to. I slowly walked to the door, my heart pounding. I pulled the bolt and opened it. No one. Only the heavy rain and an empty alley behind the building. After that, things escalated. One night, I was alone in the store. It was nearing closing time, and I was wiping down tables when the sound of the soda machine turning on startled me. I hadn't touched it. The machine was silent all night usually. I turned and saw the drink buttons light up and flicker. Then the speakers crackled to life, playing static and faint, garbled voices. Suddenly, the store intercom started buzzing on its own. I grabbed my phone to call Mark, but the signal dropped. As I reached the back office, the lights flickered and a shadow darted across the hall. I called out, but no answer. The freezer door creaked open slowly, though I was sure I'd locked it tight. Inside, the freezer was empty, except for a lone Subway apron hanging on the hook, wet and frozen stiff. I grabbed it, and a chill ran through me. It smelled like something had died. I dropped it and sprinted to the front counter, ready to call the police, but my phone was dead. The door chimed behind me. I spun around. A figure stood there, a woman, pale and soaked, wearing a Subway apron. Her eyes were black, empty holes. Her mouth moved silently, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I backed up, but the door slammed shut behind her. I was trapped. Suddenly, the lights went out. I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was on the floor, the sun shining through the windows. I was alone. The apron was gone. Mark told me later that night that I had called him, screaming incoherently before the line cut out. I never worked the graveyard shift again. Months later, the subway shut down after an employee vanished without a trace. The building stands empty now, the lights always off. Sometimes drivers say they see a faint glow coming from inside, and if you listen closely, you can hear the faint tapping on the windows like someone trying to get out. Story the end. Working at Subway was supposed to be a simple, straightforward job. For me, it was just a way to earn some extra cash during college, nothing fancy. The store was located in a modest strip mall on the outskirts of a medium-sized city, surrounded by a few small shops, a gas station, and a late-night convenience store that closed around 11 p.m. Most days, the shift was pretty boring, taking orders, making sandwiches, cleaning, restocking, but one night changed everything. I was working a closing shift on a Thursday. My manager had left around 7 p.m., and I was alone for the rest of the night, which was typical. After 8 p.m., the store usually quieted down, and it was mostly just me, finishing up prep work, cleaning the floors, and making sure everything was ready for the next day. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of the refrigerators filled the background. Around 8:30 p.m., the store was nearly empty. I was behind the counter wiping down the bread station when the doorbell chimed, and a man walked in. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a dark hoodie pulled over his head, sunglasses despite the store's bright lighting, and jeans. His face was mostly hidden, but I caught a glimpse of a scar running down his left cheek. "Hi, what can I get for you?" I asked, forcing a smile. He didn't answer, just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the menu board. I waited a moment. "Sir," he finally spoke, voice low and flat. "Turkey, no veggies." I started making the sandwich, the silence stretching as I moved through the motions. Something about his presence made me uneasy. The way he barely blinked and his stillness unnerved me. When I handed him the sandwich, he placed a crumpled bill on the counter and left without a word. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. The same man came back inside, still wearing the hoodie and sunglasses. My heart rate picked up. "You're back," I said cautiously. He nodded. "You're alone?" "Yeah, just me tonight." He didn't move but kept his gaze fixed on me. Then the lights flickered violently and went out, plunging the store into darkness. Emergency lights cast eerie red glows on the walls. My phone's battery was dead. I had no way to call for help. I heard a scraping noise coming from the back prep area, soft like fingernails on metal. The man was gone. I tried to keep calm, moving quickly to the back exit and slipping outside, locking the door behind me. I didn't come back to work the next night. A week later, the manager called me, asking if I wanted to come back. I told her no. Some nights, when I'm alone, I still feel like someone's watching me. Waiting. Story the end. Working the night shift at Subway wasn't something I ever thought would turn into a nightmare. When I first took the job, I just wanted a steady paycheck, somewhere to put my time between classes. It was a small, quiet location on the edge of town, tucked away in a strip mall that had seen better days. The neighborhood was mostly empty after dark, the kind of place where you'd rarely get customers after 10 p.m. But that was fine with me. I preferred the calm nights to the hustle and bustle of daytime crowds. My manager, Karen, was a no-nonsense kind of woman in her late 30s, and she trusted me enough to let me close the place alone after a few weeks. Closing meant working the graveyard shift, usually from 8 p.m. until midnight, sometimes later. I didn't mind. It gave me time to listen to music, clean, and just think. But that peace didn't last long. It started with small things, little noises, shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, that kind of stuff. I'd tell myself it was just fatigue or the old building settling. But every night, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I was used to feeling safe alone, but something about that subway changed everything. One night, about 2 weeks into my solo closings, I was wiping down the counters after a slow evening when I heard the door chime. Ding. I looked up, surprised. We had been closed for 20 minutes, and the doors were supposed to be locked. I checked quickly. The lock was engaged. No one was there. I shrugged it off as a malfunction, maybe a stray breeze or the chime sensor acting up. But it happened again, 2 nights later. This time, the chime rang twice in quick succession. I looked toward the entrance, heart pounding, but no one was there. The parking lot was empty except for a single car parked far away. When I looked closely, I realized it wasn't a regular car. It was old, rusted, like something that had been abandoned for years. I didn't think much of it until the next night. That night, rain was pounding the windows. The store was deserted, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I was mopping the floor when I heard a faint knocking on the front glass door. Just one knock, then silence. I stopped, my mop in midair, and stared. The parking lot was empty, and the rain blurred the glass, but I could see something, a figure standing just outside. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a dark hooded jacket. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel his eyes locked on me. I swallowed hard and slowly backed away. When I turned on the lights behind me, the figure was gone. I tried calling Karen, but the line was dead. My phone had no signal either. The feeling of isolation hit me hard. I locked the door and moved to the back room, trying to stay calm. The next day, I told Karen what happened. She didn't seem surprised. "That place has a history," she said quietly. "Before it was a Subway, it was a small diner. Something bad happened there years ago." I pressed her for details, but she just shook her head. "People don't talk about it much. Just be careful." That night, I started paying closer attention to the security cameras on my phone. I noticed something strange. At odd times when I was alone, the cameras would glitch or go offline for several minutes. Sometimes they'd show static, then a shadowy figure moving just out of view. I couldn't tell if it was a bug or something else. One night, around midnight, the power went out completely. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long red shadows. I was in the middle of wiping down the sandwich toppings when I heard a scraping sound from the front door. Slow, deliberate scratching noises, like nails dragged across metal. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my phone flashlight and shone it toward the door, but saw nothing. The sound stopped abruptly. I made my way to the door cautiously. The lock was intact, but wet handprints stained the glass. They were long, too long to be human, smeared down the pane like someone had pressed their palms and slid them down. I backed away and called Karen. She told me to come in the next day and we'd discuss things. I never made it to work the next day. That night, as I was about to leave, I heard a voice whisper my name from the kitchen. Soft, chilling, barely audible. I spun around, heart hammering. The kitchen was empty. I grabbed my things and hurried out. The parking lot was empty except for that old rusted car again. Its driver's side door was open. I locked myself in my car and waited, eyes glued to the restaurant. After 15 minutes, the door to Subway creaked open on its own. No one stepped out, but the air felt colder. The car's engine suddenly roared to life, headlights flickering on and off. I started the engine and sped away. The next day, I quit. I never went back. The Subway closed a few months later. The rusted car stayed parked outside until it was towed away. I still can't explain what happened those nights. Sometimes when I drive past that strip mall, I see the lights flicker inside and I swear I hear that faint whisper calling my name. Story, the end. Working the closing shift at the Subway on the outskirts of a small town in Ohio was never something I thought much about. It was a typical late-night gig for a college student needing some extra cash, nothing glamorous or particularly exciting. The store itself was one of those typical franchises. Neon signs, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the constant smell of freshly baked bread mixing with the scent of pickles and deli meats. Most nights were uneventful. You'd get your regulars, the occasional late shift worker craving a sandwich, and then the quiet hours when the store felt almost abandoned with only the blinking open sign cutting through the darkness outside. That particular night started just like any other. I clocked in at 4 p.m., got a quick rundown from the day crew, and settled into my usual routine of prepping, stocking, and wiping down surfaces. The lunch crowd had been sparse, and after 8 p.m., it slowed down to a trickle. Around 10:30 p.m., I was wiping the counters, thinking about the essay I had due the next day, when the door chimed. A customer. I looked up to see a man who immediately put me on edge. He was tall and lanky, wearing a dark hoodie pulled over his head, and his hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, despite the warm summer night outside. His face was partially shadowed, but I caught a glimpse of pale skin and a tense, almost wild look in his eyes. Something about him didn't sit right. "Hey," Welcome to Subway, I said, forcing a smile. What can I get for you? He said nothing at first, just stood silently by the counter. The air felt heavier, the quiet in the restaurant suddenly thick and uncomfortable. I'm closing in about an hour, I added, hoping to gently usher him out if he wasn't going to order. But I'm happy to make you something if you want. Still no response. He finally muttered, cold cut combo. I nodded and started making the sandwich. He watched every movement with an intensity that made my skin crawl. No request for extras, no sauce, no cheese, just meat and bread. I wrapped it up and told him the total. He pulled out a crumpled wad of bills, his hands trembling as he counted the money. The way he handled the cash was awkward and jerky, like he was struggling to maintain control over his own movements. I handed him his change, and as he took the sandwich, I couldn't shake the feeling he was sizing me up, like he was testing me. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and left without a word. I breathed a sigh of relief and went back to cleaning, trying to shake the unease. The rest of the evening passed slowly, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional beep from the oven. When the clock struck 11, I started closing procedures. I turned off the open sign, swept the floors, wiped down the tables, and emptied the trash. As I took out the trash to the dumpster in the parking lot behind the restaurant, I felt eyes on me. I glanced up and saw the man from earlier standing just beyond the glow of the street lamp. His hoodie was still pulled low, but now the hood was off and I could see his face clearly. It was gaunt, pale, with sunken eyes that seemed almost hollow. I felt my heart quicken. He didn't say anything, just watched. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. The sense of being watched lingered, and I kept glancing at the windows. Then I heard a soft noise from the kitchen, the sound of the back door rattling. I froze. The back door was locked and alarmed. I always checked it myself before closing. I crept toward the door, flashlight in hand, and peered outside. Nothing but darkness. I locked the door again, my hands shaking. Back inside, I heard footsteps on the linoleum floor, slow, deliberate. I spun around but saw no one. The restaurant was empty except for me. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in the restaurant, I whispered. I think he broke in through the back door. Are you in a safe place? I'm in the manager's office. Door locked. Stay on the line. Officers are en route. I could hear footsteps again, closer this time. A shadow moved past the office door. A soft tapping on the door. I held my breath, clutching the phone. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the front of the restaurant. Glass shattered. I screamed into the phone. He's breaking the front window. The line went dead. The air filled with cold. I heard breathing, slow, heavy, right outside the office door. The doorknob rattled. Then silence. I waited, frozen. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights flooded the windows. Police officers burst in, guns drawn. They searched every inch of the restaurant, no sign of the intruder. Outside, they found footprints leading into the darkness, but no trace beyond. I quit the job that night. Some nights, when I drive past that subway, I swear I see a figure standing just inside, watching. I never want to go back. Story, the end. Working the late shift at the Subway restaurant wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was steady pay. It was steady pay and close to home. I'd been there about 6 months when the strange stuff started happening. Small things at first, barely noticeable, but gradually building until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The restaurant was in a strip mall near the outskirts of town. Most nights, the place was quiet after 9 p.m. There were usually only a handful of customers, sometimes none at all. I was usually closing alone, which made the atmosphere both peaceful and sometimes unsettling. It was a cool autumn evening when the first real incident happened. I was working the 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. Shift alone, like usual. The night had been slow, just a few orders trickling in here and there. Around 10:30, I was wiping down the counters and restocking the napkins when the front door chimed, the sound that always meant someone had entered or left. I looked up immediately expecting to see a customer, but the entrance was empty. The parking lot outside was deserted, lit only by the dull glow of a street lamp. I shrugged it off and continued cleaning. But then the door chimed again, and again. Each time, no one was there. It was almost like the sensor was malfunctioning. Or maybe there was something outside triggering it. The whole plaza was eerily silent, and the chill in the air suddenly felt heavier. Trying to shake the uneasy feeling, I finished cleaning the condiment station and headed back toward the prep area. I noticed the sandwich bread on the counter was shifted slightly from where I'd left it. I chalked it up to me being tired and forgetting. Just then, the lights flickered once, then settled. The fluorescent hum seemed louder, more intense. I thought maybe the wiring was old, but I hadn't had any real electrical issues before. I turned toward the back storage room when I heard a faint scraping noise. It sounded like metal scraping on tile. I froze, listening hard. The sound was coming from behind the walk-in freezer. I slowly walked toward the noise, flashlight in hand. When I peeked behind the freezer, nothing was there, just stacks of soda boxes and cleaning supplies. The scraping noise stopped. I exhaled, relieved, and turned to go back. But then I heard it again, this time a whisper, so soft I could barely catch the words. It sounded like, "Leave. Leave now." I spun around, heart pounding. I called out, "Hello?" But there was no reply. The restaurant was empty. Just me and the strange noises. The air felt thick and cold. I hurried back to the front, locked the door, and pulled down the closed sign. The sandwich prep counter was immaculate, but I had the overwhelming urge to pack up and leave. I glanced at the security monitors in the office. Everything seemed normal. The cameras showed the empty dining area, the entrance, and the back rooms. But one camera, the one pointed at the prep counter, flickered strangely. The screen was distorted, like static creeping over the image. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing behind the counter. But when I blinked, it was gone. I shook my head, tired and probably imagining things. I grabbed my things and left, locking up tight behind me. Over the next week, the incidents worsened. The door chimes would ring repeatedly, especially around closing time, but no one was there when I checked. I started hearing footsteps in the empty kitchen. Sometimes the lights would flicker violently, plunging the room into near darkness. Once, the soda machine turned on by itself, spraying fizzy drinks everywhere. My coworkers didn't believe me when I told them. They said I was stressed or overtired. Janet, the manager, told me to try to ignore it, that nothing strange was happening. But one night, during my shift alone, the most terrifying thing happened. It was nearing 11 p.m. I was wiping the floor near the front when I heard the door chime repeatedly, like a frantic knocking. I rushed to the entrance and looked through the glass. The parking lot was empty, but I saw a figure standing under the street lamp about 30 feet away. It was a man wearing dark clothes, but I couldn't make out his face. I unlocked the door, ready to ask if he needed help. But before I could open it, he vanished, just like that. I stared in disbelief. The street lamp flickered. No footsteps, no sound. Suddenly, the restaurant lights dimmed again, and the temperature dropped. I felt an icy presence brush past me. I spun around to see a shadowy form materializing behind the counter. It was tall, faceless, with a dark hood covering its head. It moved silently, slowly reaching toward the bread trays. Frozen with fear, I couldn't move or scream. The figure leaned close to me, and I could feel its cold breath, like a winter wind blowing through my soul. Then the lights snapped back on. The figure was gone. I bolted out the door and didn't stop running until I reached home. I called Janet the next day and quit on the spot. She told me others had seen strange things in that location before, but never spoke about it. I learned later that the strip mall was built on the site of an old factory that had burned down decades ago. Many people in town whispered about strange happenings around that area, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Sometimes, when I pass by that subway, I swear I hear the door chime and feel a chill brush past me. I haven't worked a late shift there since. Story the end. The subway where I worked was on the edge of a small town, near an old highway that hardly anyone used anymore. It wasn't a busy spot, mostly truckers, the occasional night shift worker, and sometimes people who just needed a quick meal before heading home. I started working there during my last year of high school, mostly to save some money for college. The job was simple, the pay was okay, and the hours fit around my schedule. At first, nothing weird happened, just the usual late-night customers who wanted sandwiches and maybe some chips or a cookie. The usual hum of the fluorescent lights, the constant beep of the oven timers, and the faint smell of bread and deli meats. But after a few weeks, subtle things started slipping in, things that made me uneasy. One night, Around 11:30 p.m., after most of the customers had left, a man walked in. He was wearing a long black coat, despite it being a hot summer night, and he had a strange, almost desperate look in his eyes. He came to the counter and ordered a foot-long Italian BMT, but when I started making the sandwich, he suddenly stopped me. "Make it without the meat," he said, voice low and tense. "Just bread and veggies." That struck me as odd, but I didn't say anything. I finished the sandwich and handed it over. He took a few bites and then asked if he could sit in the corner booth. That booth was always the one I felt the most uncomfortable around, like something about it was off. Maybe it was the way the light hit it or the fact that it was so close to the back exit. He sat there, staring out the window. I kept busy cleaning up, but every now and then I caught him looking at me, eyes dark and hollow. When the clock hit midnight, it was time to close, and I started locking the doors. The man was still sitting there, but when I told him we were closing, he didn't say a word. He just stood up and walked toward the back exit. The strange part was the door never opened. Not a creak, not a sound. He just vanished. I checked all around the store, no sign of him. It was like he disappeared into thin air. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he slipped out another way, but something didn't feel right. Over the next few days, I heard from other employees at the store about strange things happening during the night shift. Things moving on their own, cold spots that made your skin crawl, and unexplained noises from the back storage room. One girl told me she saw a shadowy figure watching her from the corner booth when she went to refill the drink station. I started avoiding that booth. I even tried to switch shifts to avoid working late, but the manager said they needed me there. One particularly slow night, I was closing by myself. About an hour before we locked up, the lights started flickering. Then, without warning, the oven shut off, and the entire store went dark except for the emergency exit signs. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight app and heard the faint sound of whispering coming from the dining area. I froze, heart pounding, trying to locate where the voices were coming from. I called out, but only silence answered. Then the whispering grew louder, but I still couldn't make out any words. Suddenly, the front door slammed open and shut violently, even though there was no wind. I ran to the door and locked it, but the store was empty. I looked outside, no cars, no people, just the empty parking lot under the streetlights. That night, I left as fast as I could and didn't look back. A few days later, the store manager called me, telling me they were closing the store temporarily due to maintenance issues. But I knew better. I never returned. Sometimes, when I drive past that subway, I see someone sitting in the corner booth, always alone, always staring out the window with those hollow eyes. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear whispers calling my name, asking me to come back. Story, the end. The subway, where I worked, was a modest little spot tucked away in a strip mall at the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just the usual fluorescent lights, the familiar hum of the refrigerators, the smell of bread baking, and that faint aroma of deli meats lingering in the air. It was my first real job, taken just to pay the bills while I attended community college. The shifts were usually uneventful, but working late nights alone sometimes gave me the creeps. I figured it was just the solitude messing with my head. I'd been working there for about 3 months when the strange things started happening. It was late September, just as the days were cooling off and the shadows grew longer in the evening. The neighborhood wasn't the best, but the store had a steady stream of customers throughout the day. By 8 p.m., though, the crowds had thinned, and I was usually the only one left in the store. One Thursday night, I was working the closing shift alone. Mark, the manager, had left around 7:30 p.m., reminding me to lock up tight and call if anything went wrong. I smiled and assured him I was fine. The usual routine was to tidy up, restock the sandwich ingredients, and keep an eye out for any last customers. Around 9 p.m., a man walked in. He was tall, dressed all in black, with a hoodie pulled tight over his head and dark sunglasses. Even though it was indoors, his presence immediately set me on edge. I tried to make eye contact as he approached the counter. "Hey, welcome to Subway. What can I get for you?" I said, forcing a friendly tone. He didn't answer, just stared at me silently. His voice was barely a whisper when he finally spoke. "Turkey. No cheese. No veggies." I nodded, trying to keep my hands steady as I prepared the sandwich. Something about his stillness and the way he avoided looking at me made my skin crawl. When I handed it over, he dropped a folded bill on the counter and left without a word. I locked the door behind him, but the unease lingered. A few minutes later, the doorbell chimed again. It was the same man. This time he stood in the doorway, watching me with those cold, unreadable eyes. "You're alone tonight," he said, voice low and chilling. "Yeah," I replied nervously. "Just me." Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in a harsh red glow. My phone was dead, no way to call for help. From the back of the store, I heard scraping sounds, fingernails dragging across metal. The kitchen door rattled like someone was trying to get out. I froze, heart pounding. The man was gone. I grabbed the keys from the counter and fled out the back door into the cold night air. I never went back. Sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear that scraping, and I swear I hear that voice whispering, "You're alone. Story the end." The night I started working the closing shift at Subway, I didn't expect anything unusual. It was just a simple job, one I took to help pay the bills while I was finishing college. The store was located in a quiet strip mall on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that seemed to disappear after dark. The streets emptied quickly, and by 10 p.m., most of the nearby businesses were closed. Subway was one of the few places still open, catering mostly to late-night drivers and the occasional small group of teenagers looking for a cheap meal. I was on the schedule from 6 p.m. to midnight, and after about 9 p.m., I was usually the only person in the store. My manager, Steve, said he trusted me to close on my own, and I thought it was fine. I liked the solitude. No drama, no interruptions, just me and the steady rhythm of the sandwiches being made. The first few nights passed without incident. I learned the routines, cleaned the counters, restocked the veggies, and tried to ignore the dull hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The quiet, though, started to feel heavier as the nights wore on. It was almost as if the silence was pressing down on me. About a week into my shifts, I began noticing small, odd things. The door chime would ring. Ding! And when I looked up, no one was there. I'd step outside to check the parking lot and find it empty except for a few abandoned shopping carts. I figured it was a faulty sensor or a gust of wind triggering the door. Then, one night, as I was prepping the bread, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, but no one was there when I turned around. My heart rate jumped, but the store was empty. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. Working late nights alone tends to do that to you. A few nights later, things escalated. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the store was dead silent except for the refrigerator hum. I was cleaning the sandwich counter when the door chime rang again. I glanced up. No one. Then, I heard the sound of a low whisper, almost like someone breathing near my ear. I spun around, but again the store was empty. The lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. My skin prickled. I called my manager, Steve, but the line was dead. I tried the back door, locked tight. The whispers grew louder, indistinct, as if a dozen voices were murmuring just out of reach. I backed toward the prep table, clutching a sandwich knife. Then, from the corner of the store near the drink coolers, a figure appeared. It was hazy, translucent, barely there. A silhouette of a man, pale and gaunt, eyes glowing faintly red. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just stared. Then, without warning, it vanished. I dropped the knife and ran to the front door, but it wouldn't open. I was trapped. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one answered. The lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I could hear breathing, heavy and close. Something cold brushed past me. I screamed and fumbled for my phone. No signal. Minutes passed like hours. Suddenly, the emergency lights came on, casting a dim red glow over the store. The door unlocked with a click. I didn't hesitate. I bolted outside into the cold night air. I never went back. Steve told me later that the building had been a restaurant for decades, with a dark history. A man had died there under mysterious circumstances. Employees claimed to hear voices and see apparitions long before I started. I always thought those stories were just urban legends. Now I'm not so sure. Sometimes when I drive past that subway late at night, I swear I see a shadow moving behind the window and I hear the faintest whisper calling my name. Story the end. The Subway I worked at was nothing special, a run-of-the-mill franchise store tucked into a strip mall on the edge of town. Most days were dull, the kind of place where the loudest noise was the sizzle of the toaster oven or the hum of the sandwich prep lights. I was a college student, 22, working the late shifts to cover rent and groceries. Closing shifts were usually quiet, sometimes too quiet, but I was used to it. Alone in the store after 10 p.m., I'd clean, restock, and watch the clock tick down to midnight. One Friday night, things started off normal enough. The dinner rush had tapered off by 9:30 p.m., and after the last customer left at 10:15, I locked the front door and turned off the neon "open" sign. The street outside was deserted, except for the occasional car passing by on the adjacent road. I was wiping down the counters when the door chimed again. Surprised, I looked up. A man stepped inside. He was tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, jeans, and scuffed boots. I immediately felt uneasy, though I couldn't say why. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile. "We're closed for the night." He didn't respond, but walked toward the counter and tapped it lightly. "Can I help you?" I asked. He hesitated, then said in a low voice, "A sandwich, turkey." I started making the sandwich, but his presence was unsettling. He kept glancing around, as if watching for someone, but no one else was there. When I handed it to him, he counted out crumpled bills and took the sandwich without a word. He paused near the door, then turned back. "Can I use the bathroom?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Sorry, it's closed." He nodded slowly and left. I breathed a sigh of relief and locked the door again. A few minutes later, I heard something thumping against the back door. My heart jumped. That door was locked and alarmed. I grabbed my phone and checked it. The signal was weak, but I was able to call my manager. "There's someone at the back door," I whispered. "Stay calm and don't open it," she said. "I'm on my way." The banging stopped abruptly. I waited, listening for footsteps. Then the front door chimed again. I spun around. The man was back, but his face was pale and his eyes looked wild, almost desperate. "I need help," he said, voice cracking. I told him I'd called the police. He took a step toward me. I backed away toward the manager's office, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator told me officers were en route. Suddenly, the sound of glass shattering from the front window made me jump. I looked out the small window next to the door. The man was gone. The police arrived minutes later. They searched the area but found no one. The next day, I learned that the man was wanted in connection with a series of burglaries and assaults in the area. I quit the job shortly after. Some nights when I drive past that subway, I swear I see a shadowy figure watching from the inside. I never want to work alone there again. Story the end. Working at Subway was supposed to be simple. I needed a job to cover rent while I was in college, and this place near my apartment was hiring. The shifts were flexible, the work straightforward, and the pay decent for a fast food joint. I quickly learned the routine: greet customers, make sandwiches to order, clean up, and handle the register when it got busy. Most of the time, it was uneventful. But a few months into the job, something changed. Something I still can't explain. The store was located in a small strip mall near the edge of town. The neighborhood wasn't great, and there were a few abandoned buildings nearby, and at night, it could get pretty quiet, almost too quiet. The subway itself was modest: fluorescent lights, cracked tiles, and a perpetual smell of bread and cold cuts. The closing shift usually fell to me or another employee, working from about 7 p.m. until midnight. It was during one of those late shifts, just as autumn was settling in and the days were growing shorter, that I first noticed the odd things happening. That night, I was alone, as usual. The last customer had left about an hour earlier. I was in the middle of wiping down the sandwich station when the front door chimed. I turned around expecting to see someone, but the dining area was empty. I glanced out the window. The parking lot was deserted, the streetlights flickering with the wind. A soft chill crawled down my spine. I told myself it was just the sensor misfiring. I returned to cleaning, but then heard the door chime again and again. Each time, no one was entering or leaving. The door itself remained closed. No movement outside. I checked the security monitors in the office. Nothing. The camera angles showed the front entrance, the dining room, and the kitchen. Not a soul. The air inside the store suddenly felt heavier, like it pressed against my skin. I rubbed my arms and tried to focus on work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept hearing faint whispers, so soft I could barely make out the words. At first, I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks after long hours alone. Then, the lights flickered. I blinked, and the fluorescent hum changed pitch, dipping into an unsettling buzz. The sandwich station scale beeped erratically, though no one was near it. The toaster oven lit up and started crackling, even though it wasn't on. My heart pounded. I grabbed my phone and flipped through the security footage again. Something caught my eye in the dining area, a dark figure standing by the restrooms. I zoomed in, but it vanished the moment I focused on it. Suddenly, the kitchen door swung open with a creak, though I was sure I'd locked it earlier. A cold gust swept past, carrying a faint metallic scent like blood or rust. I called out, but my voice felt swallowed by the silence. Hello? Nothing. A soft scraping sound came from the walk-in freezer door. It was slow and deliberate, like nails dragging down the metal. I approached cautiously. As I reached for the handle, the lights dimmed again and a whisper hissed right by my ear. Leave. I stumbled back, my breath shallow and fast. The temperature plunged and my phone screen fogged over as if I were outside on a cold morning. The door chimed again, louder this time. My eyes darted toward the front counter where I noticed a sandwich wrapper shifting on its own. The plastic crinkled as if something inside was moving. I backed away. Suddenly, the lights cut out, plunging the restaurant into darkness. The humming stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. My phone's flashlight flickered weakly in the blackness. I saw a faint glow coming from the prep station. The sandwich wrapper lay open now, empty. A shadow loomed behind it. I froze. The whisper came again, clearer. Go. I bolted for the exit. The door was locked. I fumbled with the keys, shaking. Then the door handle rattled violently, as if someone or something was trying to get in. I finally got the lock undone and slammed the door behind me, gasping in the cool night air. I didn't return to work the next day. When I finally told my manager, she shrugged it off as stress or exhaustion. But she also told me strange things had happened before. Workers hearing voices, doors opening on their own, lights flickering. Over the next few weeks, I heard from other employees. One claimed the freezers would open by themselves at night. Another swore she saw a figure standing silently in the corner of the dining room, disappearing when looked at directly. Eventually, the store closed down. I don't know why. Management never said much. But I suspect those incidents weren't just my imagination. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear a faint door chime, and I swear I can hear that whisper telling me to leave. Story the end. I started working at the subway on the edge of town during my first year out of high school. It wasn't much, but it paid enough to keep gas in my car and let me split rent with my roommate, Danny. The store was in a small plaza surrounded by an old hardware shop, a liquor store that always seemed 1 week away from closing, and a failing gym that no one went to. We closed at midnight every night except Fridays and Saturdays when we stayed open until 2 a.m. for the late night crowd. The manager, Hassan, was a good guy. He was in his 40s, soft-spoken, and never hovered. He trusted me enough after a couple of weeks to start giving me the late shifts, which paid slightly more. It wasn't bad. You'd get the occasional drunk guy stumbling in asking for a meat sandwich, or groups of teenagers who took forever to decide and left a mess. But for the most part, it was slow, quiet, and kind of peaceful. One night in November, things shifted. It was a cold Thursday, around 11:30 p.m., and I was working alone. The shift had been slow all night. I'd prepped the bread, cleaned the counters, wiped the sneeze guard, and stocked the veggies. My phone said 11:42 when the bell over the front door rang. I looked up, expecting someone drunk or tired from work, but instead I saw a man standing perfectly still in the doorway. He was tall, really tall, had to be at least 6'5", wearing a long, dark coat that was dripping wet, even though it hadn't rained all day. He had a beard that looked unkempt, like he hadn't trimmed it in months, and his eyes were wide. I mean, really wide, like he was trying to open them as much as humanly possible. "Evenin'," I said, keeping my tone light. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he stepped in slowly and let the door swing shut behind him. I watched as he approached the counter with deliberate steps, like every footfall was measured. There was a deep, musty smell, like wet leaves and mildew, that filled the space with him. "You still making sandwiches?" he asked, voice dry and cracking like he hadn't used it in a while. "Yep," I replied. "What can I get started for you?" He stared at the bread for an unusually long time. I waited. "Cold cut combo," he said finally. "White bread." I nodded and started building it. As I worked, he kept his eyes on my hands the entire time, never blinking, not once. I laid down the meats, then looked up to ask about cheese, but he interrupted me. "No cheese," he said. "No toasting, no vegetables, just mayonnaise." I hesitated. "Just mayo? No lettuce? Tomato?" His lips stretched into a grin. His teeth were gray. "Just mayonnaise," he repeated. I grabbed the mayo bottle and gave the sandwich a generous squirt, but he said more. I added more. I covered the meat in thick white globs until it was impossible to see anything underneath. He gave a satisfied nod. I wrapped it up quickly, trying not to look into his eyes again. As I handed him the bag, I realized something weird. He didn't pull out a wallet. Instead, he reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out a $5 bill. It was damp. Not like it had been in the rain, but like it had been submerged. Water dripped off the edge as he handed it to me. "Keep the change," he said, even though it wasn't enough to cover the sandwich. I opened my mouth to mention it, but stopped myself. Something told me not to argue. He walked out with the bag held to his chest like it was fragile. The door shut, and the store felt colder, like he'd taken something warm with him. That should have been the end of it, just a weird customer. But he came back the next night, and the one after that, always at the same time, between 11:40 and 11:50, always ordered the same thing, no vegetables, just mayonnaise, until the sandwich was drowning in it, always paid with a soaked $5 bill. By the fourth night, I was more annoyed than scared. I tried asking questions. "Late night for you?" I said casually. He didn't answer, just stared. That night his coat looked older, more worn. The hem was fraying and the buttons were hanging on by threads. "You live around here?" Still nothing. I gave up trying to talk to him and just made the sandwich. He left as silently as he arrived. It started getting worse. On the sixth night, he showed up with a strange odor, not just musty. There was something sharp underneath it, something sour. I tried to ignore it, but my stomach turned when I unwrapped the cold cuts, and he grinned at me again. "Double meat tonight," he said, "and double mayo." The sandwich was obscene. By the time I finished it, it looked like someone had poured yogurt into a bag of lunch meat, but he took it with the same reverence, held it close, and walked out. I called Hassan the next morning and told him something wasn't right with that guy. Hassan sighed and said he'd come in during the next night shift with me to keep an eye out. Friday night came. It was 11:47 when the door opened. He walked in, same coat, same beard, same wide eyes, but this time something had changed. His fingers were purple like he'd dipped them in ink. He didn't look at me. He looked at Hassan, who stood beside me behind the register. "This isn't right," the man said. Hassan stepped forward. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" The man's mouth twitched. "You changed something. It's not supposed to be different." I felt my pulse spike. "We didn't change anything," I said quickly. He looked at me again, eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me." Then he pulled something from his coat. It looked like a sandwich bag, clear plastic. Inside was an old wet subway napkin browned at the edges. He held it like a photograph. "This is the real one," he whispered. "You remember this?" I looked at Hassan. He looked just as confused as I felt. "Sir," Hassan said calmly, "I think you might need help. Maybe a hospital." "It's her!" the man screamed, loud and sharp, slamming the plastic bag on the counter. "You fed her to me!" We both flinched. I backed away. Hassan reached for his phone. That's when the man leaned forward and spat something, wet, white, and chunky, right onto the counter. It looked like a piece of meat coated in mayo, but it had hair in it, long strands of brown hair. I gagged. Hassan grabbed the panic button under the register. The man bolted, turned, and ran out the door before we could stop him. Police came 20 minutes later. We showed them the bag and the mess he'd left behind. They took it with them, said they'd look into it. Hassan checked the cameras. The guy had come in every night at the same time. Same pattern. The weirdest part? In some of the footage, you could see the automatic doors opening, but no one was there. After that, we changed the schedule. I refused to work late nights. Hassan started closing early when he could. But 2 weeks later, I got a call at 2:13 a.m. It was from the store's landline. I didn't pick up. But the next morning, I went in and found the front door ajar. The lights were off. Hassan's car was in the lot. Inside, the sandwich station was a mess. Mayonnaise smeared across the glass, bread scattered on the floor. The fridge was open and cold cuts were missing. No sign of Hassan. The police came again. His phone was in the back room. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry. But on the counter was that same plastic bag. Inside was a single strand of brown hair floating in something white. They never found Hassan. I quit that day. A few weeks later, the store shut down. No one talks about it anymore. Not the plaza owners, not the cops. Every now and then, I think I see someone out the corner of my eye near old Subway shops. A tall figure, a wet coat, wide eyes, and sometimes I dream about that sandwich, the way it looked, the way it smelled, and the grin on that man's face as he clutched it like something sacred. Story the end. It was late August when I got hired at the Subway on Maple Avenue, tucked between a rundown laundromat and a pawn shop that hadn't seen any real business in years. I was 21, going to community college part-time and needed a job badly. The manager, Donna, was a tough but fair woman in her 50s. She hired me on the spot after a 10-minute interview, barely glancing at my resume. The store wasn't exactly in the best neighborhood, but it was open 24 hours, and they needed someone to work the graveyard shift. The pay was minimum wage, but I was desperate. My first week went by smoothly. Most of the late-night customers were either drunk college students or tired delivery drivers. Some were sketchy, but nothing I couldn't handle. I usually worked alone from midnight to 6 a.m., cleaning the slicers, baking the bread, restocking ingredients, and serving the occasional night owl. Donna told me if I ever felt unsafe that I could lock the door and just wave people off. "They'll leave if you don't let them in," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. The first weird thing happened about 2 weeks in. It was a Wednesday around 3:45 a.m. I was cleaning the oven racks in the back when I heard the door chime. I hadn't seen anyone approach through the front windows, which was odd because the place was empty and the street outside was quiet. I walked up to the counter and saw a man standing there. He had already walked all the way in. He was tall, gaunt, maybe in his late 40s. His skin looked sickly pale under the fluorescent lights, like he hadn't been in the sun for a long time. He was wearing an old, oversized trench coat despite the summer heat. His eyes were a cloudy gray, and when he looked at me, I felt this intense discomfort in my chest, like my body instinctively wanted to leave. He didn't say anything for a while, just stood there. I tried to break the silence. "Hey, welcome to Subway. What can I get started for you?" His lips didn't move for a second, then slowly he said, "Turkey. On wheat." I nodded and turned around to grab the bread. The moment I did, I heard a sound like nails dragging across glass. I whipped around, thinking maybe he was messing with the sneeze guard. But he hadn't moved. His hands were still at his sides, and the glass was untouched. I shrugged it off and started making his sandwich. "What kind of cheese?" I asked. "None." "Toast it?" "No." I added the turkey and started to ask about veggies when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. His reflection in the sneeze guard was off. Not missing, but off. His reflection blinked when he didn't. It looked up when his real face was looking down, and it was smiling, this wide, disturbing grin, while his actual face remained expressionless. I blinked hard and looked again. It was normal. Just a tired guy with a blank stare. I hurried through the rest of the sandwich, wrapped it up, and rang him up. He paid in cash. His hand was ice cold when it brushed mine. I gave him his change and bag, and he walked out without another word. I watched him go down the sidewalk, his figure eventually swallowed by the shadows near the laundromat. I tried to shake it off as sleep deprivation, but the feeling lingered. When I closed up at 6, I asked Donna about him during the shift change. "Tall guy? Pale? Trench coat?" she repeated, raising her eyebrows. "You saw him?" "Yeah. Weird vibe. Has he been here before?" She went quiet, staring at the bread racks like she was lost in thought. Then she said, "He comes in every few months, always late, always the same order. Don't talk to him too much." That wasn't exactly comforting. The next few nights were uneventful, but every time I heard the door chime, I braced myself to see that man again. Then came the Friday night. It was busier than usual. A group of drunk teenagers came in around 2 a.m., laughing, being loud but harmless. After they left, I started mopping the floor when the lights flickered. I looked up at the ceiling, wondering if it was just a power issue. Then I heard it again, that scraping sound on glass. I froze, mop in hand. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was dragging a coin across the front window. I stepped around the counter and peeked out. No one was there. The street was empty. But when I turned back, he was inside. Same man. Trench coat. Blank stare. But this time, his mouth and chin were smeared in something dark. It looked like blood. I stepped back, almost slipping on the wet floor. Hey, you need help? I stammered. He didn't answer, just stared at me, then slowly looked over at the soda fountain. I followed his gaze. All the drink buttons were dripping. Thick, red liquid ran down the sides. It wasn't soda. It smelled metallic. Wrong. I blinked, and suddenly everything was normal. The machines were fine. The man was gone. I checked the security camera footage after that shift. At 3:14 a.m., the door opened by itself. No one walked in. For 2 minutes, the camera showed me staring toward the soda machine and backing away. Then the door closed. I told Donna about it. She didn't react much. Just said, "We don't keep footage past a week. Don't worry about it." The next time he came in, things escalated. It was 3 a.m. again. This time I saw him approaching from the window. He walked slower than any human I've seen. I wanted to lock the door, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching him come closer until the door chimed and he stepped inside. Before I could say anything, he walked straight past the counter, heading toward the back. I shouted, "Sir, you can't go back there!" He didn't stop. I rushed around the counter to block him, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. I checked the back, the oven room, storage, even the freezer. Nothing. When I turned back to the counter, my knees buckled. He was standing behind the register, and he was smiling. I backed away slowly, reaching for my phone in my pocket. He whispered, "Don't call." And then, like he'd never been there, he was gone again. No door chime, no footsteps. Nothing. I quit that night, left a note for Donna, and walked out before sunrise. I didn't care about the paycheck. Weeks later, I got a text from Jamie, a girl who took over the graveyard shift after me. I hadn't told her anything because I didn't want to sound crazy. Her message read, "Hey, did you ever see a guy in a trench coat, tall, comes in late?" I stared at it for a long time before replying, "Yeah, why?" She responded a few minutes later, "He was just here." He didn't order anything, just stood by the soda machine and stared at me for 5 minutes. When I blinked, he was gone. Cameras didn't catch him. I blocked her number. I didn't want to get pulled back into that world. A month after that, I drove past the subway and saw police tape across the front doors. I pulled over and asked one of the bystanders what happened. He said the overnight worker was found in the freezer. Her body was frozen solid, eyes wide open, black mouth stretched in a silent scream. No signs of forced entry. Cameras had nothing. No one could explain how she got locked in. They never reopened that location. Sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear that chime, that soft scrape on glass, and I remember the look in his eyes. That wasn't a man. That was something wearing human skin, moving through this world in a way we aren't meant to understand. Story the end. It was a Tuesday night, late September, the kind of night when the air starts to shift from warm to something cooler, almost damp. I had picked up a closing shift at the subway near the edge of town, one of those locations tucked inside a dying strip mall next to an old laundromat and a payday loan shop that never seemed to have customers. I was 19 and juggling community college and part-time work, so closing shifts meant quiet, easy hours, or so I thought. The store closed at 10 p.m., and usually by 8:30, things started slowing down. That night, though, the parking lot outside felt especially empty. Unusually so. I remember glancing at the security monitor behind the counter around 9:15 p.m. There were 3 grainy black and white views. One pointed at the dining area, one at the front door, and the third out to the parking lot. All of them looked still and lifeless. I remember thinking it felt like I was inside a snow globe, cut off from everything. I was alone, of course. That's how closing worked at our location. My coworker, Jasmine, had left a little after 8. She had a family thing, and since it was dead slow, I told her to clock out early. Manager said it was fine. That left just me, mopping floors and cleaning the prep area. It was around 9:40 when the bell on the door rang. I looked up from the sink, and for a second, I didn't see anyone. Then the man stepped in. He was tall, way taller than average, and wearing a hooded sweatshirt, one of those deep navy blue ones that practically eats light. The hood was up, pulled low, and he had sunglasses on, even though it was pitch black outside. I blinked, thinking maybe he'd take them off. He didn't. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep it casual, though I already had a strange feeling. "We're closing in 20 minutes, just so you know." He didn't answer. Just stood near the front of the counter, looking at the menu above my head. I waited. Still nothing. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. Something about the way he moved was off. It wasn't jerky or sudden, but it was just a little too smooth, too deliberate. "Can I help you?" I asked again. Finally, he spoke. "I want a sandwich." "Sure," I said. "What kind?" He tilted his head slightly. "Something fresh." It struck me weird the way he said it, like he didn't know what Subway was, like he'd read about it or seen it on TV but had never actually been in one. I went into my default routine. "We've got turkey, ham, roast beef, meatball." "Meat," he interrupted. "Okay, meatball it is." I started pulling on gloves and grabbed a scoop. "What kind of bread?" He didn't answer, so I just picked Italian. While I worked, I kept sneaking glances at him. His hands were in the front pocket of his hoodie, not moving. His face, what little I could see, was pale, unnaturally pale. The skin at the base of his neck, just above the collar, looked almost bluish-white under the fluorescent lights. I got the sandwich assembled and asked, "What veggies?" Again, nothing. I looked up. He was staring right at me now, or I think he was. It was hard to tell with the sunglasses. I felt cold all of a sudden, like standing next to a freezer with the door wide open. "No veggies," he finally said. "All right," I muttered and wrapped it up. "That'll be $7.29. He reached into his hoodie slowly and pulled out a wad of cash. I noticed his hands then, thin, bony, with veins that seemed too dark, too raised. He peeled off a 10 and slid it across the counter. I made change, handed it to him, and slid the sandwich over. But he didn't leave. He just stood there. I wiped my hands on a towel. "Is there something else?" He tilted his head again. "You're here alone?" I froze for a second, heart skipping. "Just about closing time," I said, dodging the question. He grinned then, the only time he showed any expression. His lips stretched wide, almost too wide. His teeth were perfectly even, but something about them felt unnatural, like they weren't real teeth at all. Like a prop. "You should lock the doors," he said, turning to walk away. The bell rang again as he exited, disappearing into the dark beyond the glass. I watched him go, expecting to see a car or hear an engine start. Secors. But the parking lot camera showed nothing. No movement. No figure. He had just vanished from view. I locked the doors, just like he said. I spent the next 15 minutes cleaning fast, checking behind every counter and cabinet. At 10:01 p.m., I grabbed my stuff and got ready to leave. As I exited the back door into the alley behind the strip mall, I saw something sitting on top of the dumpster. The sandwich. Still wrapped. Untouched. But the wrapping was torn slightly, like it had been clawed. I didn't stop. I walked fast to my car, started it, and didn't look back. The next day, I told Jasmine about it. She joked that maybe I'd served a vampire or something. I laughed along, but it didn't feel funny. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. 3 nights later, I had another closing shift. Around the same time, 9:40 p.m., the bell rang again. I looked up, and there he was. Same hooded sweatshirt, same sunglasses. My blood went cold. He didn't say anything this time, just stood in the same spot. I didn't move. Finally, I said, "We're closing in 20 minutes. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked out. This time, I ran to the door and locked it right away. I didn't even finish cleaning. I waited until exactly 10, then bolted. From then on, every few shifts he would come in. Never ordered anything again. Never spoke. Just stood there. Sometimes 2 or 3 minutes. Sometimes 10. I started documenting each time in a notebook I kept in my backpack. I wrote down dates, times, everything I could remember. I even showed my manager, but he brushed it off. "Probably just a weirdo," he said. "You get those sometimes. Harmless." But it didn't feel harmless. One night, I brought pepper spray in my pocket. Another time, I asked Jasmine to stay late, pretending I had to train her on closing duties. Still, he came. Never violent. Never loud. Just present. Unsettling. like a shadow that kept returning. Then it stopped. For almost 2 weeks, he didn't show up. I started to relax again, even thought maybe it had been a prank or maybe he'd moved on. But then the last time he came in, everything changed. It was a Thursday. Rain was pouring in sheets outside, and thunder rolled constantly in the distance. Around 9:50, the bell rang. He was back. But this time something was different. He was soaked. Water dripped from the hem of his hoodie, and his sunglasses were gone. His eyes were the most unnatural part. They were entirely black. No whites, no iris, just bottomless pits. He stepped closer to the counter. "Do you see it now?" he asked quietly. I backed away. "Sir, you need to leave. I'll call the police." He didn't move. "They never believe you," he whispered. "They never do." I picked up the phone behind the counter and dialed 911. But the line was dead. I checked my cell. No service. The lights flickered. The fridge in the prep station groaned loudly, then shut off. Everything went silent, even the rain. When I looked up again, he was gone. Vanished. No bell, no footsteps. Just gone. I left the store that night without turning anything off. I drove straight home and called my manager from the road, told him I'd had an emergency. I didn't care if I got fired. The next morning, I went back. Everything was in place. Nothing was missing. But when I opened the fridge to restock the meats, something was wrong. At the very back, shoved behind the containers of pickles and shredded lettuce, was a piece of paper. It was soaked, darkened, almost sticking to the metal. I pulled it out. Written in smudged black ink were 3 words: "I see you." I never worked a night shift again. I switched stores, then left the job completely after 2 weeks. I tried to find out if anyone else had seen him. Called other subway workers around the area, asked online. Some said they'd heard of strange customers, people who didn't speak or ordered bizarre things. But no one had a story quite like mine. I still think about him sometimes. I still dream about that final night, the way the world went completely quiet when he looked at me. I've tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, maybe brought on by stress and too much caffeine. But some nights when I'm driving alone, I swear I see a tall figure in the distance, standing still under the dim glow of a streetlight, watching, waiting. Story the end.